My phone rang at 6:30 in the morning, shattering the peaceful silence of my kitchen. It was my daughter Simone. Her voice was trembling, but not with grief. It was vibrating with a cold, hard anticipation. "Dad," she said, "Grandpa died last night. He had a massive stroke at the nursing home." Before I could even process the words or pretend to be shocked, the phone was snatched away. I heard the greasy, arrogant voice of my son-in-law, Braden. "Listen to me, Thad," he said, dropping the title of Dad completely. "The old man is gone. And guess what? He never signed that new trust fund you were pushing for. We found the will from 2010, the one that leaves everything to Simone, the house, the land, the accounts. It is all ours. You get nothing. You have 3 days to pack your bags and get out of my house." I put the phone on speaker and set it down on the table. I didn't say a word. I just looked across the table at the man sitting opposite me. My father, Moses King, 94 years old and a veteran of the Second World War, was buttering his toast. He took a sip of black coffee, looked at the phone where Braden was still laughing, and then looked at me. His eyes were clear and sharp as flint. "Is that right?" He whispered, his voice like gravel. "Well, then ask the boy what kind of flowers I should expect at my funeral." I am Thaddeus King, 72 years old. I spent 40 years of my life as a structural engineer making sure that skyscrapers in Atlanta didn't collapse under their own weight. I know a thing or two about stress points and hidden cracks in a foundation. But the biggest crack in my life wasn't in a building, it was in my own family. If you have ever felt the sting of betrayal from the very people you raised, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which city you are listening from. I read every single one. Today I am going to tell you how a dead man planned his own funeral, just to teach the living a lesson they would never forget. The morning sun was just starting to filter through the blinds, casting long shadows across the kitchen table. The smell of frying bacon and grits filled the air. It was a smell that meant home. It was a smell that meant safety. But the voice coming from the speakerphone was pure poison. "Are you still there?" Thad Braden barked. "Did you have a heart attack too? Don't die on us yet. You need to sign the release forms for the body. The nursing home needs a next of kin signature to release him to the crematorium. We are going with the budget package. No point spending money on a shell, right?" I watched my father. Moses didn't flinch. He just chewed his bacon slowly. He was wearing his favorite flannel pajamas, and his reading glasses were perched on the end of his nose. He looked at the phone with a mixture of amusement and disgust. I cleared my throat. I forced my voice to sound shaky. I forced myself to sound like the beaten, broken old man they thought I was. I am here, Braden," I stammered. I can't believe it. He was fine yesterday. He was 94. Thad Braden snapped. "He wasn't fine. He was a ticking time bomb. And honestly, it is a relief. The fees at that place were bleeding us dry. $15,000 a month for what? For him to sit in a chair and drool." I saw Moses's hand tighten around his coffee mug. His knuckles were swollen with arthritis, but they were still strong. He hadn't drooled a day in his life. He was sharp enough to beat me at chess 3 times a week. But Braden didn't know that. Braden didn't know anything about the man whose fortune he was so eager to spend. Simone came back on the line. Her voice was softer, but it was a performance. I could hear the calculation in it. "Daddy," she said, "I know this is hard. But Braden is right about the house. We need to sell the estate. The market is hot right now. We can put you in a nice little apartment in the suburbs. It will be better for you. Less stairs. Less stairs." That was code for out of sight, out of mind. They wanted me out of the King family estate, the house my father had built with his own hands in 1965, when black men weren't supposed to own property in this neighborhood. They wanted to sell 40 years of history to pay off Braden's gambling debts and failed crypto investments. I looked at Moses. He raised an eyebrow. He made a zipped lip motion with his hand. He wanted me to play along. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, Simone. If that is what the will says." "It is what it says," Braden interrupted. "I have his lawyer on speed dial. We are coming over in an hour with the appraiser. Have your things boxed up, Thad, and don't steal anything. Everything in that house is now the property of the Simone King estate." The line went dead. I looked at the phone screen until it went dark. Then I looked at my father. He took another bite of toast. So he said, his voice calm but dangerous, "I am dead, and I am being cremated in a budget package." I poured myself more coffee, my hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from rage. They called from the Golden Horizon nursing home, I said. They told Simone you died in your sleep at 3 a.m. Moses snorted. Golden Horizon, he scoffed. That place was neither golden nor a horizon. It was a waiting room for hell. 2 days ago, Braden had convinced Simone to move Moses from his luxury private care suite to Golden Horizon. He told her it was a temporary measure while the plumbing was fixed at the suite. In reality, he was pocketing the $15,000 a month my father paid for his care and dumping him in a state-funded facility that smelled of urine and despair. But Braden made a fatal mistake. He forgot that Moses King was a man who had escaped a POW camp in Germany in 1944. A nursing home with a sleepy night guard wasn't going to hold him. I walked out of there at midnight, Moses said. The front door alarm was broken. The night nurse was asleep at the desk watching TikTok videos. I walked 3 miles to the gas station and called you. I nodded. I remembered the call at 2 a.m. I had picked him up and brought him here to the main house, smuggling him in through the back door. We were going to go to the police this morning. We were going to report the elder abuse. But now the situation had changed. The nursing home must have done a bed check this morning, I reasoned. They found your bed empty. But instead of admitting they lost a patient, they found someone else. Moses finished his sentence. Someone who actually died. A John Doe. Maybe a homeless man they brought in for the night. And because their records are a mess, they just slapped my name on the toe tag. It made sense. Horrible, bureaucratic, lazy sense. It was easier to declare Moses King dead than to admit they had let a 94-year-old man wander off into the night. So what do we do? Pop, I asked. Do we call the police? Do we call the lawyer? Moses put down his fork. He wiped his mouth with a napkin. He looked around the kitchen. This house was his legacy. Every beam, every brick. He had bought this land when people spit on him in the street. He had raised me here. He had watched Simone grow up here. And now he had heard his granddaughter and her husband discussing his death like it was a winning lottery ticket. No police, Moses said softly. Not yet. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. You heard him, Thaddeus. He said I was a burden. He said I was drooling. He said he was glad I was gone. Moses reached out and touched my arm. If we tell them I am alive right now, they will just apologize. They will say it was a misunderstanding. They will fake their love again until I really die. And then they will take everything. He stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the long driveway where Braden's car would be pulling up in an hour. I want to see it, Thad Moses said. See what, Pop? My funeral, he said, turning back to me. I want to see who cries. I want to see who cheers. I want to see exactly how deep the rot goes in this family. He pointed a finger at me. You go to that nursing home, son. You go identify the body. You cry, you wail, you play the part of the grieving son. Let them think they won. Let them plan the party. But Pop, I protested. That is fraud. That is dangerous. It is a lesson, Moses said, cutting me off. A lesson they won't learn any other way. He walked over to the pantry door. The pantry in our kitchen had a false back. Behind the shelves of canned peaches and flour was a small panic room, a safe room Moses had built in the 60s when the KKK was active in our county. It was fully ventilated, soundproof, and stocked with supplies. I am going underground, Moses said, opening the secret door. Bring me my radio and my chessboard. When Braden comes, I will be listening. He stepped into the shadows of the safe room. You have 3 days, Thaddeus, he said from the darkness. 3 days to let them dig their own grave. And on the 3rd day, he smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that promised a reckoning. On the 3rd day, I will rise. He closed the false door. I pushed the shelf of canned goods back in place. I stood alone in the kitchen. The silence returned. But now I had a mission. I washed the 2 plates in the sink. I hid Moses's coffee mug. I wiped the table down. Then I went upstairs to change into my black suit. I looked at myself in the mirror. I practiced my sad face. I slumped my shoulders. I let my eyes droop. I am Thaddeus King. I told my reflection. I am a grieving son. My father is dead, and I have nothing. I walked out the front door and got into my car. I headed toward the Golden Horizon nursing home. I was going to identify a stranger's body. I was going to sign a death certificate for a man who was currently solving a crossword puzzle in my pantry. Braden wanted a show. Simone wanted the money. Well, they were going to get the show of a lifetime. As I drove down the driveway, I saw Braden's red sports car speeding toward the house. He honked at me as he passed, a cheerful, aggressive honk. He waved. He was smiling. I didn't wave back. I just gripped the steering wheel and drove. Laugh while you can, boy, I thought, because the dead man is listening, and he has a very bad temper. The drive to the Golden Horizon nursing home was a 20-minute journey into the heart of everything that is wrong with how we treat our elders in this country. I drove my sedan with a grip so tight on the steering wheel that my knuckles turned the color of ash. My father, Moses King, had served this country in a world war. He had built businesses from nothing. He had paid taxes for 70 years, and this is where my son-in-law had decided to dump him. When Braden told us he had moved Moses to a specialized facility costing $15,000 a month, I pictured manicured lawns. I pictured nurses in crisp white uniforms who smiled. I pictured a library and a garden with oak trees. What I saw when I pulled into the parking lot of Golden Horizon was a low brick building that looked more like a minimum security prison than a home. The sign out front was missing the letter O, so it just read G. Eldon Horizon. Weeds were growing through the cracks in the pavement. There was a smell hanging in the air even before I got out of the car. It was the smell of damp cardboard and neglect. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. I adjusted my black tie. I let my shoulders slump. I practiced the look of a defeated man. I had to sell this. I had to make them believe that I was just another grieving son too overwhelmed to ask questions. I walked through the sliding glass doors, which shuttered and stuck halfway before opening. The lobby smelled of industrial bleach, trying and failing to cover up the scent of urine and boiled cabbage. The floor tiles were chipped. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a headache-inducing flicker. There was no receptionist, just a young woman in blue scrubs sitting behind a high counter texting on her phone. She didn't look up when I approached. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low and trembling. "I am Thaddeus King. I am here for my father, Moses King." She didn't stop typing. She just pointed a finger toward a hallway on the left. "Director's office. Third door. He is expecting you." I walked down the hallway. I passed rooms with open doors. I saw elderly people sitting in wheelchairs facing walls, staring at nothing. I saw a man in a stained gown calling out for water. I saw a tray of food that looked like gray paste sitting untouched on a radiator. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was where Braden had left him. For 2 days, my father had been trapped in this hellhole. If Moses hadn't been strong enough to break out, he really would have died in here. The rage rising in my chest was so hot it felt like heartburn, but I swallowed it down. I knocked on the door marked "Director." "Come in," a voice shouted. The office was small and cluttered with files. The director was a sweaty man with a stain on his tie and eyes that shifted constantly like he was looking for an exit. He didn't stand up to shake my hand. "Mr. King," he said, shuffling some papers. "I am terribly sorry for your loss. It was very sudden, but at his age, well, nature takes its course." He didn't care. To him, Moses was just a bed that had opened up and a check that had cleared. "I need to see him," I whispered. "I need to say goodbye." "Of course," the director said. "But first we need to handle the paperwork and the personal effects." He reached under his desk and pulled out a small cardboard box. It was a shoebox, really. He slid it across the desk toward me. "This is everything we found in his room," he said. I looked at the box. I opened the lid. Inside there was a pair of dentures, a paperback romance novel titled "Love in the Storm," a plastic comb, and a half-eaten bag of peppermint candies. I stared at the items. My father had a full set of dental implants he paid $20,000 for in 2005. He never read fiction, only military history and biographies. He was bald, so he didn't own a comb, and he was diabetic, so he never touched sugar. These weren't my father's things. This was just random trash they had swept off a nightstand. I looked up at the director. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the box in his face. But I remembered Moses sitting in my pantry listening on the radio. "Thank you," I said, my voice cracking. He loved these candies." The director looked relieved. He pushed a clipboard toward me. "If you could just sign here acknowledging receipt of property, and here for the release of the remains to the funeral home." I picked up the pen. My hand shook intentionally. I signed a jagged scrawl that barely looked like my name. "Can I see him now?" I asked. The director sighed, checking his watch. "He is in the holding room. Follow me." We walked to the basement level. The air down here was colder. We entered a room that smelled of formaldehyde and rust. There was a gurney in the center of the room covered by a white sheet. The director stood by the door. "Take your time," he said. "But not too long. The transport is coming in 20 minutes." I walked over to the gurney. I reached out and pulled back the sheet. I braced myself. The face staring back at me was not Moses King. It was a man who looked to be in his late 60s. He was thin, emaciated even. He had a scruffy white beard. My father was clean-shaven every day of his life. This poor soul looked like he had lived a hard life on the streets. This must have been the John Doe Moses told me about, the homeless man they had confused him with. I felt a wave of sadness for this stranger. He had died alone in this cold room, and now he was being used as a prop in a fraud. I looked back at the director. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through emails. He wasn't even looking at the body. He didn't know what Moses looked like. He probably hadn't even met him. I turned back to the body. "Oh, Pop," I wailed loudly, throwing myself over the stranger's chest. "Oh God, why did you leave me?" I buried my face in the sheet, pretending to sob. "I am sorry, brother," I whispered to the dead man so low only he could hear. "I promise I will give you a proper burial when this is over. You won't be forgotten." I stood up, wiping fake tears from my eyes. I sniffed loudly. He looks peaceful." I lied. "Yes," the director said from the doorway. He went very quietly. I walked over to the counter next to the gurney. There was a clipboard hanging there. It was the medical chart for bed 4B, the bed Moses was supposed to be in. I leaned against the counter, pretending to steady myself. I glanced at the chart. Patient name, Moses King. DOB, April 12, 1930. Diagnosis, advanced dementia. Type 2 diabetes. Bedridden. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. I froze. Dementia. My father was sharp as a tack. Diabetes. Yes, he had that, but the chart showed insulin injections 3 times a day. Moses managed his with diet and pills. Bedridden. My father walked 2 miles every morning, but the most damning thing was the billing code at the bottom of the page. Insurance provider Medicare Plus. Supplemental billing private pay. Tier 1 luxury care. I saw the monthly charge, $15,000. But then I saw a note scribbled in the margin in red ink. Patient transferred to Ward C Economy Wing. Adjust internal log, do not adjust billing. Ward C. That was the basement level where they kept the indigent patients. Braden was paying for the economy wing, which probably cost $2,000 a month, and pocketing the difference. Or worse, he wasn't paying at all and letting the state cover it while he drained Moses's accounts. I needed this paper. I looked at the director. Could I have a glass of water?" I asked, clutching my chest. "I feel faint." The director rolled his eyes, but he couldn't have a grieving relative pass out on his floor. "There is a fountain in the hall," he said. "I will get you a cup." He stepped out of the room. The second he was gone, I pulled out my phone. Click. I took a high-resolution photo of the medical chart. Click. I took a photo of the personal effects box. Click. I took a photo of the stranger's face. I shoved the phone back into my pocket just as the director walked back in with a paper cup of lukewarm water. "Thank you," I said, taking the cup with both hands. I drank it slowly. My mind was racing. This wasn't just elder abuse, this was insurance fraud. This was wire fraud. This was theft, and Braden was right in the middle of it. "We need to close up, Mr. King," the director said. I nodded. I walked over to the body one last time. I pulled the sheet back up, covering the stranger's face. "Rest easy, Pop," I said. I turned to the director. "My son-in-law, Braden, he arranged for the cremation. He wants it done fast." "Yes, we have the instructions," the director said. "Direct transport to the crematorium. No service." I nodded. "I want to change that," I said. The director frowned. "Change it, yes. I want a viewing, a full service, open casket." The director looked nervous. "Mr. King, the body. It deteriorates quickly. And the cost." "I don't care about the cost," I said, letting a little bit of the real Thaddeus King slip into my voice. He was a war hero. He deserves to be seen. I will pay for the embalming. I will pay for the best casket you have. The director hesitated. He looked at the paperwork. He looked at the body. He knew that if we did an open casket, people might realize it wasn't Moses. But he was greedy. He saw a chance to upsell. And if he refused, I would get suspicious. We can transfer him to a funeral home of your choice, he said carefully, but I would advise against an open casket. He looks tired. I will handle the funeral home, I said. Just don't burn him. If you burn him before I say so, I will sue this place into the ground. The threat hung in the air. The director swallowed hard. Of course. We will hold the remains. I walked out of the holding room. I walked back up the stairs. I walked through the lobby with the flickering lights. I stepped out into the fresh air. I got into my car and locked the doors. I let out a scream that shook the frame of the vehicle, a primal scream of anger and sorrow. Then I took a deep breath. I looked at the photos on my phone. I had the evidence, I had the body, and I had the rage. I started the engine. I was going home to meet the vultures. And for the first time in my life, I was looking forward to the fight. Braden wanted a dead body. Well, he was about to find out that the dead can haunt you long before they are in the ground. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the golden horizon behind me. But I knew I would be back. And next time I wouldn't be coming alone. I would be coming with the police. The house that Moses King built in 1965 does not look like a fortress from the outside. It sits on a hill in Atlanta, surrounded by oak trees that are older than the city itself. It is a colonial-style home with red bricks that have absorbed the heat of 50 southern summers. To a stranger, it looks like just another nice house in a gentrified neighborhood. But to me, it is a history book written in wood and stone. I know every beam in the ceiling because I helped my father lift them when I was just 22 years old. I know the foundation is solid because we poured the concrete ourselves, mixing it by hand when the white contractors refused to take the job. I walked into the hallway after leaving the nursing home, and the silence of the house wrapped around me like a blanket. It was a heavy silence, the kind that usually signals grief. But today, it signaled waiting. I locked the front door and walked straight to the kitchen. I tapped my knuckles 3 times on the pantry door, a rhythmic code we had used since I was a boy. The shelf of canned peaches swung open silently. Moses was sitting in the panic room. The small space was illuminated by a single battery-powered lantern. He had his chessboard set up on a crate, and he was wearing a headset connected to the high-sensitivity microphones he had installed in the living room decades ago. "They are coming, Pop," I whispered. "Braden and Simone, they will be here any minute." Moses didn't look up from the chessboard. He moved a white pawn forward. "Let them come," he said, his voice steady. "I am ready. Is the recording equipment running?" "It is running," I said. "Good," Moses said. "Go pour yourself a drink, Thaddeus. You are going to need it. And remember, you are a grieving son. You are weak. You are defeated. Do not let that temper of yours ruin the game." I closed the pantry door. I pushed the shelf back into place, ensuring the cans of peaches were perfectly aligned. I walked into the living room and sat down in my father's leather armchair. It was the throne of the house. The leather was worn smooth where his arms had rested for 40 years. I shouldn't have been sitting there. It felt like sacrilege. But I needed to draw their fire. I didn't have to wait long. I heard the roar of an engine in the driveway, not a respectful arrival. A loud, aggressive revving. Braden's Porsche. Then came the slam of car doors. 1, 2, 3. 3 people. They didn't ring the doorbell. Why would they? In their minds, they already owned the lock. I heard the key turn in the latch. Braden must have stolen a spare key from Simone's purse years ago. The door swung open and the vultures flew in. Braden walked in first. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny and sunglasses that cost more than my first car. He didn't look at me. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the walls. He looked at the floor. He wasn't entering a home. He was entering a warehouse of inventory. Behind him came Simone, my daughter. She was wearing black, but it wasn't morning black. It was fashionable black. She looked pale. She saw me sitting in the chair, and for a second I saw shame in her eyes. But she looked away quickly, focusing on her shoes. And then the third man entered. A short man with a clipboard and a laser measuring device attached to his belt. An appraiser. They didn't come to comfort me. They came to count the spoons. "Well," Braden said, his voice booming in the quiet room, "it smells like old people in here. We are going to need to rip out these carpets." He finally looked at me. He smiled. It was the smile of a predator who has cornered a wounded animal. "Thad," he said, nodding, "you are still here." "Good. This is Mr. Henderson. He is going to do a quick walkthrough, just to get a baseline value for the estate tax." Mr. Henderson didn't introduce himself. He just walked past me, switching on his laser device. The red dot danced across the wall like a sniper's scope. I stayed seated. I gripped the armrests of the chair, my fingers digging into the leather. "My father died 6 hours ago, Braden," I said, my voice low and rough. "His body isn't even cold yet." "And you are measuring the walls." Braden laughed. He walked over to the fireplace and picked up a crystal vase. He turned it over, looking for a maker's mark. "Life goes on, Thad," he said, putting the vase back down with a careless clatter. "And business is business. The market is volatile. We need to list this place by the 1st of the month if we want to get the best price." He walked over to the grandfather clock in the corner. It was a German antique, a gift from a general my father had served with. It had chimed every hour of my life. "This thing," Braden said, tapping the glass face with his ring. $5,000 easy. Maybe 6 if we find the right collector. "Write that down, Henderson." The appraiser scribbled on his clipboard. "That clock has been in this family for 50 years, I whispered. "And now it is going to be in someone else's family," Braden said. "Unless you have $5,000 to buy it from us." "Oh, wait, you don't, because the accounts are frozen." He turned his back on me and walked toward the window. "We should knock this wall down," he said, gesturing grandly. "Open up the floor plan. Put a wet bar right there where the bookshelf is. Modernize it. Nobody wants these dark, gloomy rooms anymore." I felt a vein throb in my temple. The bookshelf he wanted to destroy held my mother's first editions. It held the encyclopedias my father bought for me when I was in grade school so I could learn about engineering. I looked at Simone. She was standing by the door, clutching her purse. "Simone," I said. My voice was pleading. I had to play the part, but God, it hurt. "Simone, say something. This is your grandfather's house. This is where you learned to walk." Simone flinched. She looked at Braden, then she looked at me. "Dad, please," she said, her voice thin and reedy. "Don't make this harder than it is. Braden is right. The house is too big for you. The maintenance alone, it is too much." She took a step toward me, but stopped as if there was an invisible barrier between us. "We found a lovely place for you, Dad. It is in Pine Creek. It is a garden apartment. Ground floor. No stairs. It is very clean." Pine Creek. I knew it. It was 40 miles away. A concrete box next to a highway. They wanted to warehouse me. "I don't want to go to Pine Creek," I said. "This is my home." "It was your home," Braden corrected, turning around. He walked over to me. He stood over the chair, invading my space. He smelled of expensive cologne and greed. "But according to the will, it is Simone's home now. And since Georgia is a community property state, it is my home too." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "You had a good run, Thad. You lived off the old man's dime for a long time. But the free ride is over. You have 3 days. I want this place empty. If you leave anything behind, we will throw it in a skip." He straightened up and clapped his hands. "Okay, Henderson, go check the upstairs. I want to know what the master bedroom furniture is worth. And check the attic. These old hoarders usually stash cash in the walls." The appraiser nodded and headed for the stairs. My heart stopped. The attic entrance was in the hallway, but the panic room ventilation shaft ran through the attic floor. If he poked around too much, I stood up. "Don't go upstairs," I said. Braden turned around, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me," he said. I haven't cleaned it," I stammered. "It is a mess. Give me a day. Just give me 1 day to pack his personal things. Please." I tried to look pathetic. I tried to look like a man ashamed of his mess. Braden sneered. "Fine. 1 day. But Henderson checks the downstairs furniture now." He walked over to the sofa. It was a velvet Chesterfield. My mother Clara had loved that sofa. She died sitting right there, peacefully watching the rain. "This sofa is garbage," Braden said, kicking the leg of it. "The upholstery is shot. Put it on the curb." He kicked it again. A solid, disrespectful thud. I saw Simone wince. She remembered her grandmother on that sofa. "Braden," she said softly. "Grandma Clara loved that couch." "So take it, Simone," Braden snapped. "Put it in storage. I don't care. Just get it out of here." He walked into the kitchen. I held my breath. The pantry, the secret door. I heard him opening cupboards. I heard the clatter of pans. "God, look at this junk," he shouted from the kitchen. "Cast iron skillets. Who cooks with this heavy crap anymore? We are throwing all of this out. We are getting stainless steel." He was standing inches away from his own destruction. If he just leaned against the pantry shelf, if he knocked on the wood. But he didn't. He was too busy looking at the Sub-Zero fridge, calculating its resale value. I sank back into the chair. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to grab him by his silk tie and throw him through the window. I wanted to tell him that the cast iron skillet he called junk had cooked meals for civil rights leaders. I wanted to tell him that the sofa he kicked was worth more than his soul. But I sat there. I let him measure. I let him price. I let him insult. Because I knew Moses was listening. I knew that every word Braden spoke was being recorded on a reel-to-reel tape in the darkness behind the pantry. Every insult was a nail in his coffin. Every threat was a line in the indictment. Simone walked over to me. She didn't touch me. She stood there looking at the floor. "I am sorry, Dad," she whispered. "But we have to be practical. We have debts." "Debts?" I asked softly. "What kind of debts, Simone?" She didn't answer. She just shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Just pack your bag, Dad. Please. For me." She turned and walked away, joining her husband in the dining room where he was tapping on the mahogany table, wondering if it was solid wood or veneer. I closed my eyes. I listened to the sounds of my home being violated. The beep of the laser measure, the scratch of the pen, the loud, arrogant voice of a man who thought he had won. Enjoy it, Braden, I thought. Measure the walls, count the silver, because in 3 days you aren't going to be inheriting a fortune, you are going to be inheriting a nightmare. I looked at the grandfather clock. The pendulum swung back and forth. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Time was running out for Braden. And he didn't even hear the chimes. The lawyer Braden hired looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that specialized in arrogance and cheap cologne. His name was Mr. Sterling, and he walked into my father's house without knocking, followed closely by Braden and Simone. He was young, probably no older than 30, with slicked back hair and a suit that was too tight in the shoulders. He didn't look at me as a person, he looked at me as an obstacle to be removed so he could collect his fee. I was still sitting in the leather armchair where I had endured the appraisal. My hands were folded in my lap. I was practicing my breathing, trying to slow down the racing of my heart. Behind the pantry door, I knew Moses was listening. I knew he was recording every word, and I knew that what was about to happen would break his heart all over again. But it was necessary. Mr. Sterling sat down at the mahogany dining table and opened his briefcase. The click of the latches sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. He pulled out a document bound in blue paper. "Mr. King," he said, addressing me without making eye contact, "we are here to execute the last will and testament of Moses King. Given the sudden nature of his passing and the strained relationship between the deceased and his son, my client has asked me to expedite this process." Strained relationship. I whispered, my voice trembling. "I lived with him. I took care of him for 20 years. Braden laughed from the corner of the room where he was pouring himself a drink from my father's crystal decanter. "You lived off him." "Thad," he corrected. "There is a difference." Sterling held up a hand to silence us. "Please, let us keep this civil. I am going to read the relevant clauses." He cleared his throat and began to read. The words were legal and cold, designed to strip away dignity and replace it with legalese. "I, Moses King, being of sound mind and body, hereby revoke all former wills and codicils. Regarding my son Thaddeus King, I leave nothing. It is my belief that Thaddeus has failed in his duties as a son and has become a financial burden on the estate. Therefore, I bequeath my entire estate, including the property, at 450 Oak Lane, all cash assets and all investment portfolios to my beloved granddaughter Simone King and her husband Braden Thorne, to be administered as they see fit." The room went silent. I looked at Simone. She was staring at her hands, twisting her wedding ring round and round. She knew this was a lie. She knew Moses loved me. She knew that just last week we had sat on the porch watching the sunset, talking about the future. But she said nothing. Her silence was a signature on the betrayal. I don't believe it," I stammered. I stood up, my legs shaking. "My father would never write that. He would never call me a burden." "It is right here in black and white," Thad Braden said, walking over to the table. "Dated 3 months ago." He was lucid. He knew what he was doing. Maybe he finally realized who was dragging him down. I walked over to the table. Sterling tried to pull the document away, but I reached out with a desperate speed. "Let me see it," I demanded. "Let me see his signature." Sterling looked at Braden. Braden shrugged. "Let him look," Braden said. "It doesn't change anything. The ink is dry, old man." Sterling slid the document toward me. I leaned over the table. I adjusted my glasses. I looked at the bottom of the page. There it was. Moses King. The signature was shaky, jagged, and uneven. It looked exactly like the signature of a 94-year-old man whose hands were failing him. To anyone else, to a judge, to a bank teller, it would look authentic. But I saw something else. I saw the truth hidden in the ink. I felt a surge of triumph so strong I almost smiled, but I forced a sob instead. "You see," Sterling said, "it is his signature." I stared at the loops and the lines. My father, Moses King, had been right-handed his entire life. But 5 years ago, at the age of 90, he developed severe osteoarthritis in his right hand. It became painful for him to even hold a spoon. Being the stubborn man he was, he refused to stop writing. So he trained himself to write with his left hand. For the last 4 years, every check, every birthday card, every letter Moses King wrote was written with his left hand. His left-handed signature had a specific slant. The letters leaned backward slightly to the left. And because he had to concentrate so hard, the lines were actually smoother than his old right-handed writing. But the signature on this it slanted forward, to the right. It was a forgery created by someone trying to imitate a shaky old man, but doing it with their right hand. They had tried to make it look frail, but they had forgotten the most basic fact of my father's physiology. Braden had forged it. Or he had paid someone to forge it, and he had done it without knowing that Moses had switched hands. I looked up at Braden. He was smirking, swirling his drink. "Well, Thad," he asked, "are you satisfied? Or do you want to hire a forensic analyst and waste the little money you don't have?" I lowered my head. I let my shoulders collapse. I took off my glasses and wiped my eyes. It looks like his writing," I whispered, defeated. I saw the relief wash over Braden's face. He had been worried, just a little. But now he thought he was in the clear. "I am sorry," Dad, Simone said softly. "I really am." I looked at her. "If you were sorry, Simone, you would tell the truth," I said. "But you are not sorry. You are just greedy." "Hey, watch your mouth," Braden snapped, stepping forward. "Do not talk to my wife like that. You are a guest in our house now. And honestly, you are wearing out your welcome." Sterling closed the folder. "Since you are not contesting the validity of the document, Mr. King, we can proceed with the eviction notice. As my client stated earlier, you have 3 days to vacate the premises." 3 days, I said, looking around the room. 3 days to pack 40 years of life. I looked at Braden. I needed to buy time. I needed to plan the funeral. I needed to get the body prepared, and I needed to give Moses time to set the trap for the bank accounts. "I can't do it in 3 days," I said, my voice breaking. "I have nowhere to go." "The apartment in Pine Creek." "Simone said it won't be ready until next week." "That is not my problem," Braden said, cold as ice. "Go to a hotel, go to a shelter." "Braden, please," Simone interjected, touching his arm. "He is my father." Braden shook her off. "He is a leech, Simone. We need him out so we can stage the house. Every day he stays here is money we are losing." I took a deep breath. I decided to make a deal with the devil. "I will sign," I said. They all looked at me. "Sign what Sterling asked." "I will sign a waiver," I said. "A document stating that I will not contest the will. I will waive my right to sue. I will waive my right to any portion of the estate. I will give you everything. No fights, no courts, no delays." Braden's eyes lit up. He knew that even with a forged will, a probate battle could take years. He wanted the money now. "And what do you want in exchange?" Braden asked, suspicious. "I want 1 week," I said. 1 week, Braden asked. "I want to stay in this house for 7 days. Just until the funeral is over. I want to plan a proper send-off for my father. I want to organize his things, and I want to leave with dignity." I looked at Simone. "I will sleep in the guest room," I said. "You can have the master suite. Just let me stay until we put him in the ground, and then I will sign the waiver and disappear. You will never see me again." Braden looked at Sterling. The lawyer nodded slightly. It was a good deal for them. It guaranteed them the estate without a legal battle. "Fine," Braden said. 1 week. But you sign the waiver now." Sterling drafted up. Sterling pulled a legal pad from his briefcase and began to write furiously. I stood there watching them. They thought they were winning. They thought they were stripping me of my inheritance. But they didn't know that by giving me 1 week, they were giving me enough time to bury them. Sterling pushed the paper toward me. "Sign here," he said. I picked up the pen. I signed my name, Thaddeus King. I handed the paper to Braden. He took it and smiled a wide, predatory smile. "Smart choice, Thad," he said. "You finally did something right." He looked at his watch. "All right, we are going to go get dinner to celebrate. You stay here. Don't touch the silver." They packed up their briefcases. They walked out of the house laughing. I heard Braden talking about ordering champagne. I waited until the sound of the Porsche faded into the distance. Then I walked to the kitchen. I tapped on the pantry door. "Come out, Pop," I said. The shelf swung open. Moses stepped out. He looked tired, but his eyes were blazing with a fire I hadn't seen since he was a young man. He walked over to the dining table where the fake will was still lying. Braden had been so arrogant he hadn't even bothered to put it back in the folder. Moses picked it up. He looked at the signature. He laughed. A dry, rasping laugh. He forgot about the arthritis, Moses said. "He is sloppy, Pop," I said. "He is greedy and he is sloppy." Moses tore the fake will in half, then he tore it again. 1 week, he said. 1 week, I confirmed. Moses walked to the window and looked out at the twilight. "That is plenty of time," he said. He turned to me. "Get the car, Thaddeus." "Where are we going?" I asked. "We are going to the bank," Moses said. "Not the lobby, the electronic banking. I want to see exactly how much money that boy thinks he has. And then—" He paused, his face hardening into stone. "And then we are going to plan the most expensive funeral Atlanta has ever seen. If he wants to bury me, he is going to pay for it. Every single dime." The funeral home Braden chose was in a strip mall between a pawn shop and a liquor store. It was called Serenity Services, but there was nothing serene about it. It smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and desperation. We sat in a small windowless arrangement room. The funeral director, a man named Mr. Sneed, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, was tapping a cheap ballpoint pen on a laminated price list. Braden sat with his legs crossed, his expensive Italian leather shoe bouncing nervously. Simone sat next to him, staring at a plastic fern in the corner. I sat opposite them, wearing my morning suit, holding a handkerchief that I didn't need but used as a prop to hide the contempt on my face. "We want the basic package," Braden said, cutting off Mr. Sneed before he could even start his pitch. "Direct cremation. No viewing. No service. Just burn him, put the ashes in a standard urn, and we will pick it up on Tuesday." Mr. Sneed looked at his clipboard. "Direct cremation," he muttered, writing it down. "That is our economy package. It comes with a cardboard transport container and a plastic temporary urn. Total cost $900. "Perfect," Braden said, pulling out his wallet. "Let us wrap this up. We have a lot of estate business to handle." I cleared my throat. It was a low rumble, deep in my chest. $900, I repeated slowly. "You want to send Moses King, a decorated war veteran and a pillar of the Atlanta business community, into the next life in a cardboard box." Braden rolled his eyes. "He is dead, Thad," he snapped. "He doesn't know the difference between cardboard and mahogany. And frankly, neither do I. Why waste the inheritance on a fire?" I stood up. I didn't stand up like a tired old man. I stood up with a sudden surge of authority that made Simone flinch. "Because I am his son," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of fake grief and very real anger. "And I will not let you throw him away like yesterday's trash." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a black card made of anodized titanium. It was the Centurion card my father had given me years ago for emergency use only. Braden didn't know I had it. He thought he had frozen all the accounts. But this card was linked to a private trust that Braden's lawyer hadn't found yet. I threw the card on the table. It made a heavy metallic clatter that sounded like a judge's gavel. "Mr. Sneed," I said, turning to the funeral director, "ignore the economy package. We are doing the royal homegoing service." Mr. Sneed's eyes widened. He looked at the black card, then he looked at me. He smelled a commission. "The royal service," he asked, his voice suddenly smooth as silk. "Yes," I said. "I want the solid mahogany casket with the velvet interior, the one with the gold handles. I want the horse-drawn carriage procession through the historic district. I want the service held at the Cathedral of Hope, the big one downtown, not the chapel here. And I want an open casket viewing for 3 hours before the service." Braden jumped out of his chair. "Are you crazy?" he shouted. "Do you know how much that costs?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I don't care," I said. "Mr." Sneed started typing furiously on his calculator. "Well, Mr. King, with the cathedral rental, the carriage, the floral arrangements for 500 guests, and the premium casket, you are looking at roughly $50,000. $50,000, Braden screamed. His face turned a shade of red that clashed with his tie. He lunged toward the table, trying to grab the black card, but I was faster. I placed my hand over it. "You are not spending 50 grand of my money on a dead body," Braden yelled. "He is a corpse, Thad, a dry, withered corpse. He doesn't need a carriage, he needs an oven." Simone gasped. Even she was shocked by his brutality. "Braden," she whispered, "that is my grandfather." "Shut up," Simone Braden hissed. "This is about economics. That 50 grand is a down payment on a boat. It is a semester of college for the kids we don't have yet. It is real money. And he wants to set it on fire." He turned on me, poking a finger in my chest. "I forbid it. As the executor of the estate, I forbid it. You can't use that card. That is estate money. That is theft." I swatted his hand away. "It is not theft, Braden," I said calmly. "It is authorized. And if you try to stop me, I will call the local news station right now." I pulled out my phone. "I will tell them that Braden Thorne, the man who just inherited millions, is too cheap to bury the great Moses King. I will tell them you put a war hero in a cardboard box. How do you think that will look on the front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution?" Braden froze. He looked at me, and I saw the gears turning in his head. He didn't care about Moses. He didn't care about me. But he cared about his image. He cared about what his country club friends would think. He cared about what his investors would think. If word got out that he was a cheapskate who disrespected the dead, it would ruin the brand he was trying so hard to build. He wanted to be seen as a benevolent heir, not a grave robber. I took a step closer to him, dropping my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Think about it, Braden. This isn't for Moses. He is gone, like you said. This is for you." "For me?" he asked, suspicious. "Yes," I said. "You are the new head of the King Empire. You need to look the part. You need to show the city that you are magnanimous, that you are generous. If you throw a cheap funeral, people will whisper that the estate is broke. They will whisper that you are failing." I gestured to the air. "But if you give him a king's send-off, the carriage, the flowers, the cathedral, people will say, 'Look at Braden Thorne. Look how much class he has. Look how rich he must be to burn 50 grand on a funeral.'" I watched the vanity seep into his eyes, replacing the anger. He licked his lips. He imagined himself standing at the pulpit in a tailored black suit accepting condolences from the city's elite. He imagined the articles praising his devotion to family. "You make a point," he muttered. "It is a networking opportunity." "Exactly," I said. "A $50,000 marketing expense." Braden took a deep breath. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Mr. Sneed, who was holding his breath. "Fine," Braden said. "We do the royal package, the carriage, the flowers, all of it." Mr. Sneed exhaled, looking like he had just won the lottery. "Excellent choice, sir," he said, reaching for the black card. But Braden slammed his hand down on the table again. "Wait," he said. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "We do the fancy church. We do the carriage. But one thing changes." What I asked, keeping my face neutral. "Closed casket," Braden said firmly. My heart skipped a beat. I needed the casket open so I could expose the fake body, or at least make Braden sweat. But Braden was terrified. He knew the body in the morgue wasn't Moses. He hadn't seen it yet, but he was terrified that someone in the church might recognize that the dead man didn't look like the pictures. Or worse, he was just squeamish and didn't want to look at the man he had exploited. "No open casket," Braden repeated. "I want to remember him as he was. Alive. Strong. I don't want people staring at a shell. It is morbid." "But the community I protested. They will want to pay their respects. They can pay their respects to a wooden box," Braden snapped. "That is non-negotiable, Thad. If you want the carriage, you keep the lid down. Sealed. Tight." I looked at Simone. She nodded in agreement. "I think Braden is right, Dad," she said. "Grandpa wouldn't want people staring at him." I paused. I pretended to think about it. I pretended to be reluctant. Inside, I was calculating. A closed casket was actually better. It meant I didn't have to worry about disguising the John Doe. It meant I could pull off the switch without anyone seeing. It meant the surprise inside the church would be even bigger. I sighed a long, heavy sigh of defeat. "Okay, Braden," I said, "if that is the condition, closed casket." Good, Braden said, snatching the contract from Mr. Sneed. Write it up, closed casket, sealed immediately after preparation. No peeking. He signed the contract with a flourish. He felt like he had won a negotiation. He felt powerful. He looked at me with a smirk. "See, Thad," he said, "we can work together. You get your parade, I get my privacy. Everyone wins." He picked up the receipt for the $50,000. "I am going to write this off as a charitable donation," he mumbled to himself. He walked out of the room, followed by Simone. I stayed behind for a moment. I looked at Mr. Sneed. "Mr. Sneed," I said quietly. "Yes, Mr. King. I want the casket delivered to the church back entrance 2 hours before the service. I want some private time with my father before the guests arrive. Just me. To say goodbye." Mr. Sneed nodded solemnly. "Of course, sir. We will arrange it." I walked out of the funeral home. The sun was setting over the strip mall, turning the asphalt purple. I got into my car. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the panic room. Moses answered on the first ring. "Did he buy it?" Pop, I asked. "He bought it," Moses rasped. I heard every word. $50,000. That boy has an ego the size of Texas. He insisted on a closed casket, I said. Moses laughed, a dry crackling sound. "Even better," he said. "That means he won't look inside until it is too late." "Get some rest, Pop," I said. "Tomorrow night we go to the jazz club. The old guard is waiting for us. We have a body to swap and a lesson to teach." I hung up. I drove home visualizing the scene in the cathedral. Braden standing by the closed casket thinking he was safe, thinking the lid was locked. He didn't know that the only thing locked in that box was his fate, and I had the key. The digital clock on the dashboard of my sedan read 11 p.m. as we crossed the invisible line that separates the gentrified condos of North Atlanta from the historic brick streets of the South Side. Moses sat in the passenger seat wearing a fedora pulled low over his eyes and a trench coat that smelled of mothballs and memory. He had not spoken since we left the estate. He was watching the city pass by, watching the neighborhoods he had helped rebuild rise and fall and rise again. We were not going to a lawyer's office, and we were not going to the police station. We were going to a place that did not exist on Google Maps, a place that Braden and his country club friends would be terrified to enter even in broad daylight. "Pull over here, Thaddeus," my father said, pointing a gloved finger at a nondescript door sandwiched between a barber shop and a boarded-up electronics store. There was no sign above the door, just a faint blue neon light buzzing in the window. "This is the Velvet Lounge," I asked. "I haven't been here in 20 years. I thought it closed down." Moses chuckled a dry sound like leaves scraping against pavement. "Legends do not close down, son. They just go underground." I parked the car in the alley. I helped Moses out. He leaned on his cane, but his step was firm. He approached the metal door and tapped a rhythm on the steel with the brass handle of his cane. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The slot in the door slid open. A pair of eyes narrowed by years of suspicion peered out. "We are closed," the voice grumbled. "Tell him the king is awake," Moses said softly. The eyes widened. The slot slammed shut, and a second later the sound of heavy bolts sliding back echoed in the alley. The door swung open, revealing a mountain of a man in a tuxedo. "Mr. Moses," the bouncer gasped, stepping aside. "Lord have mercy. We heard—" "The word on the street was that you had passed." "Not yet," Tiny Moses said, patting the giant man on the arm. "Not yet." We walked inside. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cigars, aged bourbon, and the sweet sorrow of a saxophone playing somewhere in the back. The main room was dimly lit with red velvet booths and tables that had been polished by 1,000 elbows. It was empty, save for one circular booth in the far corner. 3 men sat there. They looked like statues carved from obsidian and granite. They were the old guard, the men who had run this city from the shadows when the laws said they couldn't run it in the light. I recognized them immediately, and a wave of nostalgia and intimidation washed over me. On the left sat Elijah Vance. He was 80 years old, a retired civil rights attorney who had argued cases before the Supreme Court. He wore a 3-piece suit that looked like it had been ironed 5 minutes ago. He was sipping water, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room for threats out of habit. On the right sat Chief Marcus Thorne, no relation to Braden, thank God. Marcus was the first black precinct captain in Atlanta. He was retired now, but he still carried himself like he had a badge pinned to his chest. His hands resting on the table were the size of catcher's mitts, and in the middle sat the man I needed to see most, Dr. Doc Holloway. He was the former chief medical examiner for the county, a man who had performed more autopsies than anyone in the state. He was smoking a thin cigar, the smoke curling around his silver beard. When Moses stepped into the light, the music didn't stop, but the room seemed to hold its breath. The three men stood up. They didn't gasp. They didn't shout. They just stood up in silent reverence. "I told you he wasn't dead," Elijah said, breaking the silence. "I told you death would have to bring a warrant to take Moses King." They embraced. It wasn't the frantic hugging of a family reunion. It was the solid gripping of arms between soldiers who had survived a war. "Sit down," Moses Marcus rumbled, pulling out a chair. "Thaddeus, get your father a drink. The good stuff." I went to the bar, and the bartender, who looked like he had been waiting for this moment, poured 2 glasses of 25-year-old scotch without asking. I brought them to the table and sat on the edge of the booth, feeling like a child allowed to sit at the grown-ups' table. So Elijah said, leaning forward, "The word is that your grandson-in-law tried to bury you." "He tried," Moses said, taking a sip of the scotch. "He put me in a hole called Golden Horizon. He stole my checkbook. And now he is planning a closed casket funeral for me on Saturday." Doc Holloway let out a low whistle. "Closed casket," he said. "That is bold. Who is the body?" A John Doe Thaddeus chimed in. "I saw him today at the nursing home morgue. Poor soul. Looked like he froze to death on the street." The nursing home slapped Pop's name on him to cover up the fact that Pop escaped. Doc Holloway shook his head, ash falling from his cigar. "Disrespectful," he muttered. "Full hiwa. To you, Moses, and to the John Doe. A man deserves his own name when he goes to meet his maker. Braden thinks he has won." Moses continued. "He has the will. He has the house. He thinks I am ash in a box. He laughed at my funeral," Thaddeus told me. "He called me a dinosaur." Marcus slammed his heavy hand on the table. The glasses jumped. "Dinosaur," he growled. "We are not dinosaurs. We are the bedrock. Does this boy know whose shoulders he is standing on? Does he know you bailed his father out of bankruptcy in '98? He knows nothing," Moses said. "He thinks history started the day he was born. He thinks money is the only power in this world." Elijah adjusted his spectacles. "So what is the play, Moses? Do we sue him? I can have an injunction filed by morning. I can freeze his assets so fast his head will spin." Moses shook his head. "No courtrooms, Elijah. Not yet. If we go to court, he will lawyer up. He will drag it out. He will hide the money he has already stolen." Moses looked at me. "Thaddeus tells me Braden has been siphoning money for 2 years. Crypto, gambling, he is desperate." I nodded. "I need to break him," Moses said, his voice hard. "I don't just want my money back. I want to strip him of his arrogance. I want him to stand in front of the whole city and be exposed for the fraud he is." Doc Holloway smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a smile that had seen too much death to be joyful. "You want the funeral to proceed?" Doc asked. "Yes," Moses said. Thaddeus arranged for the royal package. Cathedral, flowers, the whole show. Braden paid $50,000 for it. Doc Holloway chuckled. 50 grand for a box of air." "Exactly," Moses said. "But there is a problem. The nursing home is going to send the John Doe to the funeral home tomorrow. If the mortician opens that bag, he will see it is not me. He might call the police. Or worse, he might call Braden. I need that casket to be empty," Moses said. He looked at Doc Holloway. "Can you handle it, Doc?" Doc Holloway took a long drag of his cigar. He exhaled a plume of blue smoke toward the ceiling. "Serenity Services?" he asked. "Yes," I answered. Doc nodded. "I know the owner. Sneed. He is a greedy little man, but he is scared of authority. And the night attendant, the one who handles the intake. I hired him 20 years ago. He owes me a favor." Doc leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Here is what we are going to do. Tonight I will make a call. I will have the John Doe transferred to the county morgue where he belongs. I will see to it that he gets a proper burial with a chaplain and a stone. He won't be part of this circus." "And the casket?" Elijah asked. "The casket will be delivered to the church, sealed," Doc said. "Sneed will sign the paperwork saying the body is inside. He won't check. He never checks if the money is right. So Braden will be pallbearing an empty box." Marcus asked, a grin spreading across his face. Heavy, empty box, Doc corrected. We will put sandbags in it, Zin. We need him to sweat. I want him to feel the weight of his lie. Moses raised his glass. To the John Doe, he said softly, "May he find peace." To the John Doe, the men repeated. Then Marcus leaned forward. "And what about the security, Moses? If you show up at that church, Braden might try something stupid. He is cornered." "I will be there," Thaddeus said quickly. "You are a structural engineer," Thad Marcus said kindly. "You build bridges. You don't break bones." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a badge. It was his retired chief's badge, but it still carried the weight of the law. "I will have 4 of my best men in the choir loft," Marcus said. "Retired detectives. Men who know how to be invisible. If Braden so much as twitches toward you, they will drop him before he hits the carpet. And I will handle the press," Elijah added. "I still have contacts at the Journal-Constitution. I will make sure the society reporters are there. Braden wants a show. We will give him a headline he will never live down." I sat there listening to them. These 4 old men planning a tactical operation over scotch and cigars. Braden thought he was dealing with a senile old man and a weak son. He didn't know he had declared war on a brotherhood that had survived segregation riots and recessions. They were not just reclaiming assets, they were reclaiming dignity. They were teaching a lesson about respect that Braden would carry to his grave. Moses looked at me. "You see, Thaddeus," he said, "this is wealth, not the numbers in the bank. This, loyalty." He looked back at his friends. "Thank you, brothers." Doc Holloway waved his hand dismissively. "Don't thank us yet, Moses. We still have to get you into that church without being seen." "I have a plan for that," I said. They all looked at me. "The choir room," I said. "The church has a back entrance that leads directly to the organ pipes. It is behind the altar. If we get there 2 hours early, Pop can wait in the organ loft. And when the time is right," Moses said, his eyes twinkling, "I will come down like the voice of God." Elijah laughed a full belly laugh that shook the table. Oh, I would pay good money to see Braden's face. The mood in the booth lightened. The tension of the planning gave way to the warmth of shared history. They started telling stories about the old days, about the time Marcus arrested a mayor for drunk driving, about the time Elijah sued the city for redlining. I watched my father. He looked 10 years younger. The anger was still there, but the despair was gone. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was the general back with his troops. We stayed for another hour. As we got up to leave, Doc Holloway grabbed my arm. "Thaddeus," he said, his grip surprisingly strong. "Yes, Doc. That John Doe. The one in the morgue. Yes." "What did he look like?" "He looked tired," I said. "He looked like he had walked a long way." Doc nodded slowly. "I will make sure he rests easy. You tell your father that. No loose ends." "Thank you, Doc." We walked out into the cool night air. The neon sign buzzed above us. Moses stopped at the car door. He looked up at the moon. 3 days, Thaddeus, he said. 2 days now, Pop. I corrected, checking my watch. It is past midnight. 2 days, Moses repeated. He got into the car. I drove us back toward the north side, back toward the house that was currently occupied by enemies. But as I drove, I didn't feel afraid. I felt the invisible army of the old guard behind us. The casket would be empty, the church would be full, and the trap was set. Sleep well, Braden, I thought, because the dinosaurs are coming, and they are hungry. The coffee shop on 4th Street used to be our place. It was a small brick building with ivy growing on the walls and a smell of roasted beans that always reminded me of Sunday mornings. When Simone was a little girl, I would bring her here after her ballet recitals. She would order a hot chocolate with extra whipped cream, and I would listen to her talk about her dreams. She wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to be a judge. She wanted to save the world. I sat in the corner booth facing the door. It was the same booth where we had celebrated her acceptance into law school. But today there was no celebration. Today felt like an autopsy. I was dissecting the relationship with my only child, trying to find the exact moment where the rot had set in. I checked my watch. It was 10 in the morning. The funeral home appointment had been yesterday. The meeting with the old guard had been last night. I was running on 2 hours of sleep and a lifetime of disappointment. But I needed to do this. Before I let Moses drop the hammer on the entire family, I needed to know if my daughter was salvageable. I needed to know if she was driving the getaway car or if she was just tied up in the trunk. The bell above the door chimed. Simone walked in. She looked expensive, that is the only word for it. Her coat was cashmere, her bag was designer, and her sunglasses were oversized. But beneath the polish, she looked brittle. Her skin was pale, and her hands were clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked like a woman who was holding her breath underwater. She saw me and hesitated. For a second, she looked like she wanted to turn around and run. But she took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and walked over. "Hi, Dad," she said, sliding into the booth. She didn't kiss my cheek. She didn't take off her sunglasses. "Hello, Simone," I said. "Thank you for coming." She waved a hand dismissively. "I only have 20 minutes. Braden is meeting with the estate liquidators at noon. I have to be there to sign the inventory forms." Estate liquidators. They weren't even waiting for the body to be cold. They were selling the furniture before the funeral. "I ordered you a hot chocolate," I said, pointing to the cup in front of her. "Extra whipped cream, just like you used to like it." Simone looked at the cup. Her face softened for a fraction of a second. She reached out and touched the ceramic handle. "I drink black coffee now, Dad," she said softly. "Braden says whipped cream is for children." I felt a sharp pang in my chest. Braden says. Braden thinks. Braden wants. Where was Simone? Where was the fierce, independent girl I had raised? I leaned forward. I kept my voice low, gentle. I wanted to give her a safe harbor. "Simone, look at me." She hesitated, then slowly took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She hadn't been sleeping. "Why are you doing this, baby girl?" I asked. She looked away, staring out the window at the passing traffic. Doing what she mumbled. "You know what I said. You are evicting your father. You are burying your grandfather in a sealed box to save money. You are stripping the house bare before we have even said a prayer. This isn't you, Simone. You were the one who read to him when his eyes started failing. You were the one who held his hand when Grandma died. You loved him." I paused, letting the weight of the past hang in the air. "He loved you more than anything in this world," I continued. "He built that trust fund for you. He paid for your law school. He was so proud of you. How can you treat him like garbage now?" Simone flinched. A tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. "You don't understand, Dad," she hissed. "It is complicated." "Make me understand," I said. "Is it Braden? Is he forcing you?" "Because if he is abusing you, Simone, if he is controlling you, I can help. We can go to the police. I still have friends." Simone let out a short, bitter laugh. "The police," she said, shaking her head. "The police can't help us, Dad. The police can't stop what is coming." "What is coming?" I asked. She looked around the coffee shop, ensuring no one was listening. Then she leaned across the table, her eyes wide with fear. "It is not just greed, Dad. It is survival." "What do you mean, survival?" Simone took a shaky breath. Braden made some mistakes. He wanted to prove he was a big shot. He wanted to turn the small fortune his parents gave him into an empire. So he invested. In what I asked. "Crypto," she whispered. "High-risk futures, things he didn't understand. He lost it all, Dad, 2 years ago. He lost everything." I sat back. I knew he was incompetent, but I didn't know he was destitute. "So he is broke," I said. "Being broke isn't a crime, Simone. We could have helped him. Moses would have helped him if he was honest." "It is not just that he is broke," Simone said, her voice rising in panic. "He tried to win it back. He borrowed money, not from a bank. Banks won't touch him anymore." She swallowed hard. "He borrowed from the syndicate, from loan sharks in Chicago. Bad men, Dad. The kind of men who don't send overdue notices. They send people with baseball bats." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "The syndicate. I knew of them. They were ruthless." "How much?" I asked. $2 million, Simone whispered. "And the interest is compounding every week." They gave him a deadline. "Next Friday. If he doesn't pay..." She started to cry openly, now tears dripping into her untouched hot chocolate. "They said they would kill him, Dad. They sent photos. Photos of me coming out of work. Photos of Braden at the gym. They are watching us." She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her grip was desperate. "That is why we need the estate. That is why we need the house sold now. That is why we need the cash. We have to pay them off. If we don't, Braden is a dead man." I looked at my daughter. I saw the terror in her eyes. But mixed with the terror, I saw something else. I saw a twisted justification. "So let me get this straight," I said, slowly pulling my hand away. "Because your husband is a gambler and a fool because he got into bed with criminals, you decided to sacrifice your family." "Dad, please." "No, you listen to me." I snapped, my voice hard. "You decided that my father's legacy, the house he built with his bare hands, the money he saved for 50 years, all of that should be thrown into a hole to save Braden's neck." "I love him," she sobbed. "He is my husband. He is a leech, Simone," I said. "And you are not a victim. You are an accomplice." I stood up. The pity I had felt earlier was gone. It was replaced by a cold clarity. "You had a choice, Simone. You could have come to me. You could have come to Moses. We have dealt with dangerous men before. We could have protected you. We could have gone to the FBI. But you didn't do that. You chose to lie. You chose to fake a will. You chose to dump your grandfather in a budget nursing home hoping he would die fast so you could cash out." "I didn't want him to die," she protested. I needed the money." "You needed the money more than you needed his life," I said, brutal and unyielding. You put a price tag on his breath. $2 million. That is what Moses King was worth to you." I looked down at her. She looked small. She looked pathetic. But she was dangerous. A desperate person is always dangerous. "I can't help you, Simone," I said. "You have to help me," she begged. "Just sign the waiver. Don't fight the eviction. Let us sell the house. Please, Dad. If you love me, let us sell the house." I looked at the hot chocolate. The whipped cream had melted into a gray sludge. "I do love you," I said. "I love you enough to tell you the truth." I leaned down close to her ear. "You picked a side, Simone. You picked Braden. And now you have to live with the consequences." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. I threw it on the table. "Buy yourself a black coffee," I said. "You are right. You are not a child anymore. You are a grown woman who just made the biggest mistake of her life." I turned and walked toward the door. "Dad, wait!" she screamed. "Dad, don't walk away. They will kill him." I didn't stop. I pushed open the door and stepped out into the street. The air was fresh and clean. I walked to my car. I got in and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I had gone into that coffee shop hoping to find my daughter, hoping to find a reason to spare her from the storm that was coming. I wanted her to tell me she was brainwashed. I wanted her to tell me she was coerced. But she wasn't. She was fully aware. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was willing to burn down her own history to save a man who treated her like an ATM. I pulled out my phone. I called Moses. He answered on the first ring. "How did it go, son?" he asked. His voice was gentle. He knew. He knew what I was going to say. "She made her choice." "Pop," I said, my voice steady. "She is with him. All the way." There was a long silence on the line. I heard Moses sigh, a heavy, sorrowful sound. "Then let it be," he said. "We gave her a chance, Thaddeus. That is all a parent can do." "Is everything ready for the bank hack?" I asked. "It is ready," Moses said, his voice hardening again. "We start tonight." "Good," I said. I started the engine. I drove away from the coffee shop. I didn't look back at the window. I didn't look back to see if she was still crying. I had a funeral to plan. And now I had two people to mourn. My father, who was pretending to be dead, and my daughter, who was dead to me. The mercy was gone. The hesitation was gone. Braden wanted a war. Simone wanted a payout. They were both about to get exactly what they deserved. The ceiling of the pantry vibrated with the thumping bass of music coming from the living room. It was 8 o'clock in the evening, and Braden was hosting what he called a celebration of life. In reality, it was a networking mixer for his creditors and his sycophants. He had opened the good scotch, the bottles my father had been saving for his 100th birthday, and he was currently pouring drinks for men who looked like sharks in expensive suits. I had spent an hour upstairs playing the role of the grieving ghost, shuffling around the edges of the room, accepting insincere condolences, while Braden held court in the center, laughing too loud and smiling too wide. I couldn't take it anymore. The sight of him standing in front of my father's fireplace, acting like the lord of the manor, made my stomach turn. I slipped away into the kitchen, engaging the lock on the door behind me. I tapped the code on the pantry shelf. Left, right, push. The shelf swung open, and I stepped into the cool, silent sanctuary of the panic room. Moses was sitting at the small metal desk, bathed in the blue glow of a laptop screen. He wasn't playing chess tonight. He was wearing his reading glasses, and his face was a mask of concentrated fury. The air in the small room felt charged, like the atmosphere before a tornado touches down. "Close the door, Thaddeus," he said without looking up. I pushed the shelf back into place, sealing us off from the party upstairs. The music was just a dull thrum now, a distant heartbeat. I sat down next to him. "What did you find, Pop?" I asked. Moses turned the laptop toward me. It was logged into his primary investment account at First Atlanta Bank. I knew this account well. It was the nest egg. The money Moses had scraped together from 50 years of real estate deals and wise investments. It was supposed to be the foundation for the King Family Trust, the money that would send his great-grandchildren to college. "Look at the balance," Moses whispered. I looked. The number on the screen was $412.50. My breath hitched in my throat. That is impossible," I said. "Last time we checked 2 years ago, there was over $2 million in there." Moses clicked on the transaction history tab. He scrolled down. His fingers shook as he pointed at the screen. "It started 18 months ago," he said. "Small withdrawals, 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Look at the memos." I leaned in. The withdrawals were labeled innocuous things: home repairs, medical expenses, consultant fees. "Who signed these?" I asked. Moses clicked on a digital copy of a cleared check. It was a check for $50,000 dated last July. The signature at the bottom read, "Moses King." But it was the jagged fake signature, the one with the rightward slant. "He has been bleeding me dry, Thaddeus." Moses said, his voice trembling with rage. "For 2 years, while I sat in that house, while I ate dinner with him, while I trusted him to drive me to church, he was stealing my life's work." I watched as Moses scrolled through the pages of theft. It was a timeline of betrayal. August, $100,000. September, $200,000. December, a wire transfer for $500,000. "Where did it go?" I asked. Moses opened another tab. He had traced the routing numbers. "It went to a platform called Apex Crypto Exchange," he said. "And then it vanished. He bought something called Luna Dust Token and something else called Solara Futures." I remembered what Simone had told me in the coffee shop. "He lost it all, Dad. He tried to double his money. Braden hadn't just stolen the money, he had incinerated it. He had taken the sweat and blood of a black man who lived through Jim Crow and threw it into a digital slot machine run by con artists. $2 million. Gone. Evaporated into the ether of the internet." Moses slammed his fist onto the desk. The sound was loud in the small space. "That thief," he roared. "That absolute wretch." He reached for the phone on the desk. It was an old landline connected to a secure, separate line. "I am calling the police," he said, picking up the receiver. "I am calling Marcus. I want him arrested tonight. I want them to drag him out of that party in handcuffs in front of all his fancy friends." I reached out and put my hand over the receiver. I pressed the button down, cutting off the dial tone. "No, Pop," I said. Moses looked at me as if I was crazy. His eyes were wide with disbelief. "What do you mean, no, Thaddeus? Look at the screen. He stole $2 million. He left us with nothing. He is drinking my scotch upstairs while I am hiding in a pantry. I want him in a cell." I know I said, keeping my hand firmly on the phone. "And he will be in a cell. But not tonight." "Why not tonight?" Moses demanded. "Why should he get one more second of freedom? Because if we arrest him tonight, he wins the narrative," I said. I pulled the chair closer to my father. "Listen to me, Pop. If the police come now, Braden will spin it. He will say it was a mistake. He will say he had power of attorney. He will say you were confused and you authorized those investments. He will blame the crypto market. He will blame bad luck. He might even blame Simone." I paused, thinking of my daughter. "He will drag Simone down with him," I said. "He will say she knew. He will say she helped him. And with a good lawyer, he might get out on bail. He might get a plea deal. He will walk away with a slap on the wrist and a ruined reputation, but he will still be free." Moses stared at me, his chest heaving. So what do we do, Thaddeus? Do we just let him finish the bottle? We wait, I said. I pointed to the ceiling toward the sound of the party. He is feeling invincible right now. He thinks you are dead. He thinks the will is valid. He thinks the accounts are his. He has no idea we know about the theft. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Tomorrow is the funeral, Pop. He is going to stand up on that pulpit. He is going to give a eulogy. He is going to tell the world what a great man you were and how much he loved you. He is going to lie to God in his own house. Moses listened, his grip on the phone loosening slightly. And when he is done lying, I continued. When he has staked his entire reputation on being the grieving heir, that is when you come out. I smiled a cold, hard smile. We don't just want him arrested, Pop. We want him destroyed. We want the world to see the look on his face when the dead man walks. We want the investors, the bankers, the country club members. We want them all to see him for what he really is. A fraud, a grave robber, a fool. Moses slowly put the receiver back in the cradle. He looked at the screen again at the zeros that represented his life savings. You are asking me to sit on my hands while a thief sleeps in my house, Moses said quietly. I am asking you to wait for the perfect shot, I said. You were a sniper in the war, Pop. You know you don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. Moses took a deep breath. He closed the laptop. He sat in the darkness for a long moment, the only sound the hum of the ventilation fan. Then he nodded. You are right, son, he said. You are right. If we take him now, he becomes a victim of circumstance. If we take him tomorrow, he becomes a villain of history. He looked up at me. But Thaddeus. Yes, Pop. When the police come tomorrow, I want them to bring the heavy cuffs. The ones that hurt. I promise, I said. Marcus has it handled. I stood up. I have to go back upstairs, I said. If I'm gone too long, he will get suspicious. I have to go watch him drink your wine and pretend I am defeated. Moses reached out and squeezed my hand. You are a good actor, Thaddeus, he said. Better than I thought. Go on. Play the fool. Let him think he is the king of the castle for one more night. I turned to the door. One more night, Pop, I whispered. I opened the pantry shelf and slipped back into the kitchen. The noise of the party hit me like a physical wave. Laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of expensive perfume and hors d'oeuvres. I walked into the living room. Braden was standing by the fireplace holding a glass of the Petrus. He was talking to a man I recognized as a local real estate developer. Yes, Braden was saying loud enough for everyone to hear. It is a tragedy, of course. Moses was a legend, but the portfolio, it was stagnant. He was too conservative. I plan to leverage the equity in this property to pivot into emerging tech. We are going to modernize the King legacy. He saw me standing in the doorway. He didn't look guilty. He looked triumphant. He raised his glass to me. Thad, he called out. Come have a drink. We were just talking about the future. I walked over to him. I looked at the wine in his glass. I looked at the suit he had bought with stolen money. I will pass Braden, I said, my voice low and submissive. I am just going to bed. Big day tomorrow. Braden laughed. He clapped me on the shoulder. Big day, indeed, he said. Get some rest, old-timer. You are going to need your strength to carry that casket. He turned back to his friends, dismissing me like a servant. I walked up the stairs. I felt his eyes on my back. I felt the weight of his arrogance. Laugh it up, Braden, I thought as I climbed. Talk about the future. Talk about your plans. Because tomorrow you are going to learn a hard lesson about the past. You can steal the money. You can steal the house. But you can never steal the truth from a man who has nothing left to lose. I went into the guest room and lay down on the bed. I stared at the ceiling. $2 million. He had burned it all. But tomorrow we were going to light a fire of our own. And Braden Thorne was going to be the only thing that burned. The back room of Serenity Services' funeral home was colder than the morgue itself. It was a preparation room, a place of stainless steel tables and harsh fluorescent lights where the final indignities of life were addressed before the public show. But tonight, it was a stage for a different kind of operation. The air smelled of formaldehyde and lilies, a sickly sweet combination that stuck to the back of my throat. I stood next to the casket Braden had reluctantly paid for. It was a masterpiece of mahogany polished to a mirror shine with heavy gold handles that gleamed under the lights. It was fit for a king, but it was empty. Standing next to me was a man named Tiny. He was the contact Doc Holloway had promised. Tiny was 6 feet 5 inches tall with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite. He was the night manager for the funeral home, the man who handled things when the grieving families had gone home. "We have a problem, Mr. King." Tiny rumbled, his voice bouncing off the tiled walls. "What is it, Tiny?" Tiny pointed to the empty silk interior of the casket. "Wait," he said. "Your father was a healthy man, 180 pounds. If the pallbearers lift this and it feels like a feather, they are going to know something is wrong, especially that son-in-law of yours. He is suspicious." I nodded. I had thought of that. I walked over to the corner where I had stashed 3 duffel bags earlier that evening. "Sand," I said. I unzipped the bags. Inside were heavy canvas sacks filled with playground sand, 50 pounds each. "We packed them tight," I said, lifting one with a grunt. "We distribute them evenly. Head, torso, legs. It needs to feel like a man." Tiny smiled, a rare expression that made his scary face look almost friendly. "Smart," he said. "Let us load him up." We worked quickly. We placed the sandbags into the velvet lining of the coffin. We arranged them carefully, padding them with extra blankets so they wouldn't shift or thud if the casket was tilted. We shaped the bedding to look like a form was resting there just in case someone peered through a crack. Then came the most important part. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wireless Bluetooth speaker. It was a high-end model, small but with a bass output that could rattle windows. I had tested it in the panic room with Moses 3 times. The connection was strong. I placed the speaker right where the head would be nestled deep in the white satin pillow. I taped it down with duct tape so it wouldn't slide. I pulled out my phone. I dialed the secure line. "Pop, are you there?" Moses's voice came through the speaker, clear and resonant, as if he was lying right there in the box. "I am here, Thaddeus. Is the bed comfortable?" "It is sand, Pop," I whispered, "but it is high-quality sand." Moses chuckled. The sound vibrated against the mahogany wood. It was eerie. It sounded exactly like a ghost speaking from the grave. "Perfect," Moses said. "Turn the volume up to 70%. I want them to hear me in the back row." I adjusted the volume. "Okay, Pop, go silent. We are locking down." I hung up. The speaker went dead. Tiny and I stood back. The casket looked occupied. The weight was right. The trap was set. "We need to close the lid," Tiny said, reaching for the heavy mahogany panel. But before his hand touched the wood, the double doors to the prep room banged open. My heart jumped into my throat. Braden Thorne walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a tracksuit and a baseball cap pulled low. He looked frantic. He looked like a criminal returning to the scene of the crime to make sure he hadn't left fingerprints. He stopped when he saw us. His eyes darted from me to Tiny to the open casket. "What are you doing?" he snapped. "Why is it open?" I told Sneed I wanted it sealed immediately. I stepped in front of the casket, blocking his view of the interior. I couldn't let him see the sandbags. I couldn't let him see the speaker. "I was saying goodbye, Braden," I said, my voice trembling with fake emotion. I needed one last moment, just me and him. Braden marched forward. He pushed past me. He looked down at the casket, but the lid was half lowered, obscuring the contents. He reached out to lift it. "Don't," I shouted. Braden froze, his hand hovering inches from the handle. "Why not?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "What are you hiding, Thad?" I don't want you to see him," I stammered. The mortician said, "He said the preservation isn't holding well. He looks not like himself. You said you wanted to remember him alive, Braden. Please, don't look. It will haunt you." Braden hesitated. He was squeamish. I knew that about him. He hated blood, he hated sickness, and he was terrified of death. The idea of seeing a decaying body repulsed him. He pulled his hand back, wiping it on his tracksuit pants. "Fine," he muttered. "I don't want to see a zombie." He looked at Tiny. "You," he barked, "you work here." Tiny nodded slowly, crossing his massive arms. "Yes, sir." "Seal it," Braden ordered. "Right now. I want to see you screw it shut. I don't want any mistakes." I don't want anyone opening this tomorrow to take a peek." Tiny looked at me. I gave him a barely perceptible nod. "Yes, sir," Tiny said. Tiny walked to the casket. He lowered the heavy lid. It closed with a solid, expensive thunk. The sound of finality. Braden let out a breath he had been holding. He looked relieved. He thought he was locking away his problems. He thought he was locking away the evidence of the John Doe. "Lock it," Braden commanded. Tiny reached into his pocket and pulled out a decorative crank key. He inserted it into the locking mechanism on the side of the casket. He turned it. Click, click, click. The bolts engaged. The casket was sealed. Braden walked over to it. He ran his hand along the polished wood. He tapped the lid with his knuckles. "Solid," he said. "Good." He turned to me, a smirk returning to his face. "Well, Thad, that is it. The old man is boxed up. He isn't a package, Braden," I whispered. "He is my father." "He was a problem," Braden said. "And now the problem is solved." He looked at the casket again. He leaned in close, his face inches from the wood right above where the Bluetooth speaker was hidden. He lowered his voice, thinking Tiny and I couldn't hear him, or maybe he just didn't care. "You know, old man," he whispered to the box, "you were a stubborn bastard. You held on to that money so tight I thought you would take it with you." He patted the lid. A disrespectful, rhythmic slap. "But you didn't. It is mine now. All of it." He laughed softly. "I already ordered the Porsche," he said. "A 911 Turbo. Silver. I'm going to drive it to your gravesite and do donuts in the grass." I clenched my fists at my sides. It took every ounce of my willpower not to strike him. I wanted to smash his face into the mahogany. But then I remembered. The microphone in the panic room was sensitive. But the speaker was two-way. I held my breath. "Don't say anything, Pop. Not yet. Don't blow the surprise." Silence from the box. Moses was disciplined. He was listening to his own grandson-in-law desecrate his memory, and he was holding his fire. Braden straightened up. He adjusted his baseball cap. "All right, let us get out of here," he said. "This place gives me the creeps." He looked at Tiny. "Have this delivered to the church at 8 a.m. sharp, and don't drop it. That is $50,000 of wood." Tiny stared at him with cold, dead eyes. "I never drop anything, sir," Tiny rumbled. Braden shivered slightly under the big man's gaze. He turned and walked toward the door. "Coming, Thad?" he asked over his shoulder. "Or do you want to stay here and cry some more?" "I will be right there," I said. Braden walked out. The door swung shut behind him. I let out a long, shuddering breath. I leaned against the casket, my legs feeling weak. "He bought it," I whispered. "He bought the whole thing." Tiny walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "That is a bad man, Mr. King," Tiny said. "I have seen a lot of grief in this room. I have seen killers cry over their victims. But that man, he has no soul. He lost it a long time ago," I said. I looked at the casket. I tapped the lid gently right over the speaker. "Did you hear that, Pop?" I asked softly. There was a crackle of static. Then Moses's voice came through low and grim. I heard him. "Thaddeus. A Porsche. Silver. Yes, Pop." "He won't be driving a Porsche," Moses said. "When I am done with him, he won't even be able to afford a bus ticket." I smiled. "Sleep tight, Pop. Tomorrow is showtime." "I am ready, son," Moses said. "Let the church say amen." "Amen," I whispered. I nodded to Tiny. "Thank you," I said. Tiny winked. "I will drive the hearse myself tomorrow, Mr. King. I want to see the look on his face when the lid opens." I walked out of the prep room. The smell of formaldehyde didn't bother me anymore. It smelled like justice. I walked into the parking lot. Braden's taillights were fading in the distance. He was probably heading to a bar to celebrate his victory. He was probably toasting to the empty box. Go ahead and celebrate Braden, I thought, looking up at the stars. Because tomorrow you aren't going to a funeral, you are going to a resurrection. The Cathedral of Hope is the kind of place that makes you feel small. The ceilings soar 60 feet high, supported by stone pillars that have stood for a century, and the stained glass windows turn the morning sunlight into a kaleidoscope of red and blue and gold. It is a place of reverence, a place where you are supposed to speak in whispers and bow your head before the Almighty. But today the Cathedral of Hope did not feel holy. It felt like a theater stage. I sat in the front pew, the polished wood hard against my back. I was wearing my black suit, the same one I had worn to my wife Clara's funeral 10 years ago. On my face, I wore a pair of dark aviator sunglasses. To the people around me, the glasses were a shield to hide the red, swollen eyes of a grieving son. In reality, they were a mask to hide the cold, predatory focus of a man waiting for the trap to spring. The church was packed. There were 500 people crammed into the pews. But as I scanned the room, I realized with a sick feeling that I didn't recognize 90% of them. These were not my father's friends. They were not the men he had served with in the war. They were not the families he had helped in the neighborhood. These were Braden's people. I saw real estate developers in sharkskin suits checking their watches. I saw bankers whispering to each other about interest rates while looking at the altar. I saw local politicians pressing the flesh-shaking hands in the aisle as if this were a campaign stop, and lining the back walls stood the press. Braden had invited reporters from the Atlanta Business Chronicle and the Society pages. Camera flashes popped intermittently, cutting through the solemn atmosphere like lightning. Next to me sat Simone. My daughter looked like a ghost. She was trembling so violently that the pew vibrated beneath us. She held a handkerchief to her face and she was crying, but they were not the clean tears of loss. They were the murky tears of guilt and terror. She knew why we were really here. She knew about the loan sharks. She knew about the forged will. She thought she was sitting next to a defeated father and in front of a dead grandfather. She had no idea that she was sitting in the blast radius of a bomb her husband had built. I didn't reach out to comfort her. I couldn't. Not today. She had made her choice in the coffee shop. She had chosen the lie. Then the organ music swelled. It was a deep, mournful sound that vibrated in your chest. The heavy oak doors at the back of the church swung open. Tiny walked in first, wearing a tuxedo that strained against his massive muscles. He walked with a solemn dignity, his face a mask of stone. Behind him came 5 other pallbearers men hired by the funeral home because Braden hadn't bothered to ask any of Moses's friends to carry him. They carried the mahogany casket. It was magnificent. The wood gleamed under the cathedral lights and the gold handles sparkled. It looked heavy. I watched Braden watching the casket. He was standing near the pulpit, his hands clasped in front of him in a pose of pious sorrow. When he saw the pallbearers straining under the weight of the sandbags, a flicker of relief crossed his face. He believed it. He believed the body was in there. He believed the problem was sealed tight. They marched down the center aisle. The sound of their footsteps was lost under the organ music. They reached the front and placed the casket gently on the stand. It sat there ominous and final, a $50,000 box full of sand and a Bluetooth speaker. I looked up toward the choir loft high above the altar. It was shadowed dark, but I knew who was up there. Moses was sitting in the organist's booth, looking down through the grate, and flanking him were the old guard Marcus and his retired detectives armed and ready. The music faded. The priest, a man Braden had hired who didn't even know my father's middle name, said a few generic words about life and death. He spoke for 5 minutes, reading from a script. Then he stepped back. And now he said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "We will hear from the grandson-in-law of the deceased, the man who was by his side until the very end, Mr. Braden Thorne." Braden stepped up to the pulpit. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces. He looked at the cameras. He paused for effect, letting the silence build. He was enjoying this. This was his moment. He was about to act out the performance of his life. He took a deep breath and looked down at the casket with a sad, wistful smile. "Moses King." He began, his voice thick with fabricated emotion. "Was more than a grandfather to me. He was a mentor. He was a guide. He was a titan of industry." He looked up at the crowd, making eye contact with the bankers and the investors. Many of you knew him as a tough businessman, a man who built an empire from dirt. But I knew the softer side. I knew the man who sat on the porch and told stories about the war. I knew the man who worried about the future of his family. I clenched my jaw. Braden had never sat on the porch with Moses. He usually spent his visits complaining about the heat or checking his phone. In his final months, Braden continued, his voice growing stronger, gaining confidence. Moses and I grew very close. We spent hours talking about his legacy. He was tired. His body was failing him, but his mind was sharp to the end. Lies. All lies. He was painting a picture of intimacy that never existed to justify the theft he had committed. He told me that his biggest fear was that his hard work would be squandered, Braden said, glancing briefly at me. He worried that the next generation wasn't ready. That is why, in his final days, he made some difficult decisions. Braden gripped the sides of the pulpit. He was leaning into the narrative now, selling the story of the succession. I will never forget the last night I saw him, Braden said, lowering his voice to a hush. The audience leaned in. The reporters scribbled furiously. He was weak, Braden said, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. He could barely lift his head, but he reached out and took my hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. He looked me in the eye and he said, "Braden, you are the son I never had." I heard a gasp from the back of the church, probably Elijah trying not to laugh. Moses had only ever called Braden "that boy" or "the peacock." He told me, Braden continued, that he wanted me to take the wheel. He handed me the keys to the kingdom. He said, "Protect this family, protect Simone, do what needs to be done to ensure the king name survives." Braden paused, looking down at Simone. She had her head buried in her hands, shaking. I made him a promise that night, Braden declared, his voice booming again. I promised him I would carry the torch. I promised him I would modernize his vision. And although it breaks my heart to stand here without him, I find comfort in knowing that I am fulfilling his final wish. He swept his hand toward the casket. "Rest easy, Moses," he said. "Your burden is lifted. I have got it from here. The estate is safe. The future is bright, and I will make sure that every dollar you earned is used to build a legacy that would make you proud." He looked at the investors in the front row and gave them a subtle nod, a nod that said, "The money is ours. The deal is on." Then he looked at the casket again. He was a man of few words, Braden said, but his final words to me were the most important. He said, "Braden, I trust you." I sat there, my fingernails digging into my palms. The audacity was breathtaking. He was standing over an empty box, lying to God and claiming the blessing of a man he had tried to kill. I looked at the casket. I pictured the speaker taped to the velvet pillow inside. I pictured the volume dial set to maximum. Braden stepped back from the microphone, but he didn't leave the pulpit. He wanted to bask in the admiration. He wanted to let the moment linger. It was the perfect moment. I reached into my pocket. My hand closed around my phone. I unlocked it. I opened the dialing app. The number was already queued up. The church was silent save for the sound of Simone's muffled sobbing and the clicking of cameras. Braden looked down at me from the stage. He smirked, a tiny, imperceptible smirk hidden behind his mask of grief. He thought I was beaten. He thought I was just an old man in the front row watching his life get stolen. "You played your part, Braden," I thought. "You delivered your lines. You set the stage. Now it is time for the critique." I pressed the call button. 1 ring, 2 rings. The connection opened. I didn't say anything. I just waited. And then from inside the mahogany casket, a sound emerged. It wasn't a ghostly whisper. It wasn't a creak of wood. It was the sound of a throat clearing. A loud, distinct grumbling, a hem that was amplified by the acoustics of the cathedral. The sound bounced off the stone walls. Braden froze. His smirk vanished. He looked at the casket. The audience shifted. People looked at each other. Was that feedback? Was that a speaker malfunction? Then came the knock. Thud, thud, thud. 3 heavy, rhythmic knocks from inside the box. The sandbags muffling the impact just enough to make it sound like bone hitting wood. Braden took a step back from the pulpit, his face draining of color. "What? What was that?" he whispered into the live microphone. And then the voice came. The voice of Moses King, gravelly and furious, booming from the casket as if he was waking up from a nap. "You are a liar, Braden Thorne," the voice roared. The silence in the church shattered. People screamed. A woman in the 3rd row fainted. The reporters jumped to their feet, cameras flashing wildly. Braden gripped the pulpit so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at the casket, then at the ceiling, then at me. "No," he stammered. "No. That is impossible. He is dead. I have the certificate." The voice from the casket laughed, a dry, chilling laugh. "I am not dead, boy," the voice thundered. "But you are about to wish you were." I sat back in my pew and folded my arms. The sermon was over. The judgment had begun. The silence in the cathedral was absolute, the kind of heavy, reverent silence that usually precedes a prayer. But in this case, it was the silence of a captured audience hanging on every word of a master storyteller. Braden stood at the pulpit, gripping the sides of the wood with hands that were manicured and steady. He had found his rhythm now. He had moved past the initial nerves and was fully immersed in the role of the grieving heir, the dutiful grandson who had been burdened with the heavy crown of the king legacy. He looked out at the faces in the pews, the bankers, the investors, the society climbers, and he smiled a sad, brave smile that seemed to say, "I am hurting, but I am strong for you." I sat in the front row watching him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. I had my phone in my hand, hidden beneath the fold of my black morning coat. The screen was dim, but the call was active. The line was open. Braden took a deep breath and leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper that echoed through the massive stone chamber. He was a man of vision. Braden said, his eyes misting over with fake tears. But he knew his time was coming to an end. I remember the last conversation we had. It was in the library just 2 days before he passed. The fire was dying down, and he looked at me with those intense eyes that had seen a century of history. He reached out and took my hand. Braden paused for effect. He looked down at Simone, who was shaking in the pew next to me. He probably thought she was shaking with grief, but I knew she was shaking with the terror of being an accomplice to a crime that was currently being broadcast to half of Atlanta. He squeezed my hand. Braden continued, his voice trembling slightly, and he said, "Braden, you are the future. You are the son I never had. You are the only one with the strength to carry this family forward." He told me that he regretted not giving me control sooner. He said, "Braden, take the company, take the house, take it all and build something greater than I ever could." The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. My father, Moses King, had never called Braden anything other than that boy, or occasionally the peacock when he was feeling generous. The idea that Moses would hand over his life's work to a man he considered a parasite was so laughable that I almost snorted aloud. But I held it in. I waited. Braden looked up toward the ceiling as if he were communicating directly with heaven. And so today, Braden said, his voice rising to a crescendo, "I accept that charge. I accept the torch he passed to me. I promise you, Moses, wherever you are, I will not let you down. I will be the leader you knew I could be." That was the cue. I looked at the mahogany casket sitting on the stand just 10 feet away from Braden. It was sealed tight, the gold bolts gleaming under the lights. It looked impenetrable. It looked final. I tapped the mute button on my phone screen, unmuting the line. At that exact moment, a sound cut through the air. Thump. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a dull, heavy thud, like a fist hitting a thick wooden door. But in the acoustic perfection of the cathedral, it sounded like a gavel strike. Braden froze. He stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open slightly. He looked around confused. He looked at the organ loft, thinking maybe a pipe had burst. He looked at the microphone, thinking it was feedback. The audience shifted in their seats. A few people glanced around nervously. Braden laughed a short, nervous chuckle that sounded like glass breaking. "Apologies, folks," he said, flashing a charming grin. "Old buildings, right? The acoustics in here are..." Thump, thump, thump. 3 distinct rhythmic knocks, louder this time, more insistent. They did not come from the ceiling. They did not come from the walls. They came undeniably from the center of the altar. They came from inside the mahogany box. The silence that followed was terrifying. It wasn't the reverent silence of before. It was the silence of 300 people holding their breath at the same time. Braden took a step back from the pulpit. His face went from a healthy flush to the color of wet chalk. He looked at the casket. He looked at the sealed lid. He knew what was inside. Or rather, he knew what wasn't inside. He knew it was supposed to be empty or filled with sandbags. Sandbags do not knock. I think we are having some technical difficulties," Braden stammered, his voice pitching up an octave. "The sound system seems to be..." "You are a liar, Braden Thorne," the voice boomed through the church. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a ghostly moan. It was a voice of gravel and iron, a voice that had commanded platoons and negotiated million-dollar deals. It was the voice of Moses King, and it was coming directly from the casket. A woman in the 3rd row screamed, a short, sharp shriek of pure terror. Several people in the back stood up ready to run. The reporters who had been half asleep suddenly scrambled for their camera's lenses, zooming in on the coffin. Braden looked like he had been shot. He gripped the pulpit so hard I thought the wood might splinter. He stared at the box, his eyes bulging. Who is doing that?" he hissed into the microphone, forgetting that it was still live. "Is this a joke? Thad, is this you?" The voice from the casket laughed. It was a dry, mocking sound that chilled the blood. "Thad didn't steal $2 million from me, boy," the voice roared. "Thad didn't forge my signature on a will. And Thad certainly didn't dump me in a rat-infested nursing home to die." The crowd gasped, a collective intake of air that sucked the oxygen out of the room. The bankers in the front row looked at each other with wide eyes. The investors who Braden had been wooing just last night began to pull at their collars. Braden was shaking now, visibly shaking. He looked at the casket, then he looked at me. "Turn it off," he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Turn it off. It is a recording. It is a deep fake." He ran down from the pulpit. He ran toward the casket. He looked like a madman, his hair wild, his composure shattered. He hammered his fist on the lid of the coffin. "Stop it," he yelled at the wood. "Stop playing games. There is nobody in there. It is sand. It is just sand." The admission hung in the air. "It is just sand." The crowd murmured. Why would a grieving grandson say his grandfather's coffin was full of sand? The voice from the box spoke again, calmer now, but infinitely more dangerous. "Sand don't talk, Braden. And sand don't know about the Solara Futures account you drained dry." Braden recoiled as if the box was hot. He stumbled back, tripping over his own expensive shoes. He fell onto the carpet, landing hard on his backside. He scrambled backward crab, walking away from the casket, his eyes fixed on it in horror. How do you know that?" he whispered. "I know everything," the voice said. "I know about the loan sharks. I know about the Apex exchange. I know you pawned my wife's jewelry last Tuesday." Braden looked around the church, seeking an ally, seeking anyone who would help him. But there was no help. Simone had buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The guests were staring at him with a mixture of horror and fascination. They were watching a man unravel in real time. "This isn't real," Braden shouted, tears streaming down his face. "I am dreaming. This is a nightmare. You are dead. I have the certificate I paid for the cremation." "You paid for a show," Moses's voice thundered, "and you are getting one." I sat there in the front row and I slowly took off my sunglasses. I folded them and placed them in my pocket. I looked at Braden sprawled on the floor, a pathetic figure in a $5,000 suit. I stood up. I turned to the crowd. I turned to the reporters who were filming every second of this meltdown. My father was a man of dignity. I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. He believed in truth, and he believed that a man should look his accuser in the eye. I looked down at Braden. "You wanted an open casket, Braden?" I asked. "You said you wanted to remember him as he was." Braden shook his head violently. No, do not open it. Do not open it." I walked toward the casket. Tiny, the massive pallbearer, stepped forward from the shadows. He produced the ornate crank key from his pocket. I nodded to him. "Open it." "Tiny," I said. "Let us see what Braden is so afraid of." Tiny inserted the key. Click. The sound echoed through the silent church. Click. Braden scrambled to his feet. "Don't," he screamed, lunging toward us. "It is empty. It is a trick." But he was too late, and he was too slow. Tiny turned the key one last time. The locking mechanism disengaged with a heavy metallic thud. I reached out and gripped the gold handle of the lid. "You said I was the future Braden," I said, looking him dead in the eye. I lifted the heavy mahogany lid. "Well, the future is here, and he is pissed off." I lifted the heavy mahogany lid of the casket, and the sound of the hinges creaking echoed through the silent cathedral like the groaning of a dying beast. The air in the church was so still you could hear a pin drop, but what happened next hit the floor with the weight of an anvil. I stepped back and gestured for the world to see. There was no body inside. There was no Moses King. There was no John Doe. Resting on the white satin pillow where my father's head should have been was a black Bluetooth speaker, the power light blinking a steady rhythmic blue. And filling the rest of the expensive velvet-lined box were 6 canvas bags stamped with the logo of a local hardware store, 50 pounds of playground sand. The crowd gasped. It was a collective sound of shock and confusion that swept through the pews like a wave. The bankers in the front row stood up, craning their necks. The reporters pushed forward their cameras, clicking furiously, capturing the absurdity of the moment. Braden stared into the box. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. He looked at the sandbags. He looked at the speaker. He looked at me. His brain was trying to process the impossible. He had paid $50,000. He had signed the papers. He had seen the hearse arrive. "It is sand," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It is just sand." Then the reality snapped into place. The humiliation hit him. He realized he wasn't mourning a tragedy, he was starring in a farce. He spun around to face the crowd, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He pointed a shaking finger at the choir loft. "Turn it off," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Turn it off right now. Who is doing this? Who is playing games?" He grabbed the microphone on the pulpit, ripping it from its stand. "This is a prank," he yelled at the stunned audience. "This is sick. Someone hacked the system. My grandfather is dead. This is elder abuse. Where is the security? Arrest that man." He pointed at me. "Arrest him. He desecrated the body. He stole the body." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just stood there by the empty casket watching him unravel. It was ugly and it was beautiful. He was a rat trapped in a corner biting at the air. Then the speaker in the casket crackled one last time. "I am not in the box, Braden," the voice of Moses said, calm and authoritative. Braden spun back to the casket. "Then where are you?" he shrieked. "Where are you, you ghost?" "Turn around, boy." The command came not from the speaker. It didn't come from the ceiling. It didn't come from the walls. It came from the back of the church. It came from the massive oak double doors that led to the main vestibule. Boom! The doors swung open with a force that shook the floorboards. A shaft of bright morning sunlight sliced through the dim interior of the cathedral, blinding everyone for a second. Dust motes danced in the beam of light, creating a halo effect around the figures standing in the doorway. The silhouette was unmistakable. Sitting in a wheelchair was a man. But he wasn't slumped over. He wasn't frail. He was sitting bolt upright, his posture as rigid as a steel beam. He was wearing a uniform, not a hospital gown, not a suit. He was wearing his World War II dress uniform. The olive drab wool was pressed to perfection. On his chest, a row of medals gleamed in the sunlight. The Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the Victory Medal. On his head, he wore his garrison cap tilted at a sharp angle. He held a silver-headed cane in his lap like a scepter. It was Moses King, the real Moses King, alive, breathing, and angry. Standing behind him, flanking the wheelchair like royal guards, were the members of the Old Guard. Chief Marcus Thorne in his dress blues, Elijah Vance in his attorney's suit, Doc Holloway smoking an unlit cigar. They stood with their arms crossed, their faces grim and satisfied. And standing right behind the wheelchair, gripping the handles, was me. I had slipped away from the altar during the chaos. I had walked down the side aisle while Braden was screaming at the sandbags. I had taken my place where I belonged, behind my father, pushing him forward. A hush fell over the room. It was deeper than silence. It was the sound of 300 people questioning their own sanity. Braden dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud, but no one flinched. They were too busy staring at the resurrection. Moses raised his hand. He signaled for me to push. I began to walk. The wheels of the chair rolled silently over the plush red carpet of the center aisle. We moved slowly, deliberately. We passed the back rows where the reporters were standing with their mouths open. We passed the middle rows where the politicians were frantically trying to figure out which side they should be on. We passed the front rows where the bankers were realizing that their loans to Braden were about to default. Every eye was on Moses. He didn't look left. He didn't look right. He kept his eyes locked on the pulpit, locked on Braden. Braden was shaking his head back and forth, mouthing the word no over and over again. He looked like he was seeing a demon. He rubbed his eyes, hoping the image would disappear. But we kept coming. We reached the front of the church. I stopped the wheelchair right next to the empty casket. Moses looked at the mahogany box. He looked at the sandbags. He poked one of the bags with his cane. "Nice wood," he said, his voice carrying to the rafters without a microphone, "but a little tight for my taste." He looked up at Braden, who was trembling on the stage. Braden was hyperventilating. He looked at the empty casket, then at the living man. The cognitive dissonance was breaking his brain. You, he stammered. "The certificate, the cremation, I saw the papers." Moses reached into his uniform pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. You saw what you wanted to see, boy, Moses said. You saw a shortcut to a payday. Moses motioned for the microphone. I walked over, picked it up from the floor, and handed it to him. My father held the mic with a steady hand. He looked out at the crowd. He looked at the faces of the people who had come to bury him. He smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a general addressing his troops after a victory. "Good morning, everyone," Moses said, his voice booming. He adjusted his medals. "I want to apologize for the confusion," he said. "And I want to apologize for being late to my own funeral." He paused, looking directly at Braden, who was now leaning against the pulpit for support. "I got held up," Moses said, his eyes twinkling with cold fire. "I was busy attending a very important meeting." "With who?" Braden whispered, horrified. "With my lawyers," Moses said. "And the district attorney." The crowd erupted. The murmurs turned into shouts. Moses raised a hand for silence. He got it instantly. "You see, folks," he continued, "it turns out that dying is very complicated, especially when you aren't actually dead. It creates a lot of paperwork." He turned his wheelchair slightly so he was facing Braden fully. "You told these good people that I was senile, Braden. You told them I was weak. You told them I gave you my empire because I couldn't handle it anymore." Moses leaned forward. "Look at me, son. Do I look senile to you?" Braden didn't answer. He couldn't. He was paralyzed. "You called me a dinosaur," Moses said, his voice dropping to a growl. "You said I was history." Moses slammed his cane on the floor. "Well, you were right about one thing. I am history. I am the history that built this city. I am the history that survived bullets in Germany and batons in Alabama. And I am the history that is about to teach you a very painful lesson about the present." He pointed the cane at the empty casket. "You tried to bury me in a box of lies, Braden. But the thing about lies is that they rot. The truth lasts forever." Moses looked at Simone. She was still sitting in the pew, her makeup running her face a mask of tragedy. "Hello, Simone," Moses said softly. "Grandpa," she sobbed. "I am so sorry." Moses didn't offer her comfort. He didn't offer her forgiveness. He just looked at her with a profound disappointment that was worse than anger. "We will talk later, granddaughter," he said. "Right now I have business with your husband." He turned back to Braden. "You wanted a show, Braden. You paid $50,000 for this stage, so let us give the audience what they came for." Moses snapped his fingers. From the choir loft the old guard moved. Marcus raised a hand. And from the shadows of the sacristy, 4 uniformed police officers stepped out. They weren't the ceremonial guard. They were on duty, and they were carrying handcuffs. They marched onto the altar. Braden saw them coming. He looked at the side exit. It was blocked by Elijah Vance, who was standing there with his arms crossed, smiling like a shark. "There is nowhere to run," Braden Moses said. "The doors are locked, the cameras are rolling, and the bank accounts—" Moses tapped his breast pocket where his phone sat. "The bank accounts are frozen. The real ones. Not the ones you stole from." Braden collapsed to his knees. He looked small. He looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's suit. "Why," he wailed, "why did you do this? Why didn't you just tell me you were alive?" "Because," Moses said, his voice ringing with finality, "I wanted to see if you would cry." He looked at the sobbing man on the floor. "And you didn't shed a single tear, Braden. Not for me. You only cried for the money." Moses handed the microphone back to me. He sat back in his wheelchair, adjusting his garrison cap. "Take him away, boys," he said to the police. "He is ruining my funeral." As the officers moved in to hoist Braden from the floor, I looked at my father. He sat there surrounded by the ruins of his family, but he looked stronger than I had ever seen him. He had risen, and the judgment day was just beginning. The sanctuary of the Cathedral of Hope had transformed from a place of worship into a courtroom, and Braden Thorne was the only defendant. He had scrambled backward away from the wheelchair until his back hit the wooden pulpit. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving beneath his expensive suit jacket. He looked at Moses King sitting there alive and furious, and then he looked at the congregation as if begging them to confirm his delusion. "You are dead," Braden stammered, his voice pitching high with hysteria. "I have the paper." The doctor signed it. "I paid the bill." "You are Ash. You are supposed to be Ash." He looked at me, his eyes wide and frantic. "It is a hologram," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger. "It is a trick. Thad hired a look-alike. That is not Moses. Moses couldn't walk. Moses couldn't talk. My father didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply rolled his wheelchair forward one revolution. The rubber tires squeaked on the marble floor. "Come touch me, boy," Moses said, his voice low and dangerous. "Come shake the hand of the man you tried to bury. See if I am a hologram. Or come see if my cane feels real when I wrap it around your ankles." Braden flinched, curling into a ball. He couldn't process the reality. His entire scheme relied on the silence of the dead, and now the dead were speaking. I stepped forward. I took off my morning jacket and draped it over the back of the pew. I loosened my tie. I was done grieving. I was ready to work. "He is not a hologram, Braden," I said, "and he is not a ghost. He is the man who escaped the prison you put him in." I raised my hand and signaled to the back of the church. The side doors near the choir loft opened. This wasn't a dramatic entrance like Moses had made. This was official. This was the heavy boot of the law coming down. 4 uniformed officers walked in, but they weren't alone. Walking in front of them was a woman in a gray suit holding a thick file folder. I recognized her immediately. It was Dr. Sterling, the director of the Georgia Department of Health. Braden saw the uniforms and his face drained of the last dregs of color. He tried to stand up using the pulpit for leverage, but his legs were like jelly. "What is this?" he whispered. "Why are the police here?" Moses spun his wheelchair around to face the approaching officers. He nodded to Dr. Sterling. "Dr. Sterling," Moses said, "thank you for coming on such short notice." Dr. Sterling walked up the stairs to the altar. She didn't look at Braden. She looked at the crowd. She adjusted her glasses and spoke clearly into the space where the microphone used to be. "We received an emergency tip yesterday regarding the Golden Horizon nursing home," she announced. "Upon inspection, we found severe violations of state code. We also found a discrepancy in the morgue logs." She opened her folder and held up a photo. It was the photo I had taken of the John Doe. "The body scheduled for cremation today under the name Moses King has been identified," she said. "His name was Arthur Miller. He was a homeless veteran who passed away from pneumonia 3 days ago. His identity was swapped to facilitate an insurance fraud scheme." The crowd gasped. The reporters in the back row were typing furiously on their phones, live streaming the revelation. "Insurance fraud," Braden squeaked. I didn't know." Liar, Moses roared. The sound was so loud it echoed off the stained glass. "You knew everything, Braden. You moved me to that hellhole to save money. You paid the director to falsify the records. You wanted me dead so you could cash out the policy and raid the trust fund." Moses pointed his silver-headed cane at Braden like a sword. "That is kidnapping," he shouted, counting the crimes off on his fingers. "You took me against my will and held me in a facility without my consent. That is identity theft. You used a dead man's body to fake my death certificate so you could steal my assets. That is wire fraud. You transferred $2 million of my money across state lines into your crypto accounts while I was sitting in my kitchen eating breakfast." Moses leaned forward, his eyes burning with the fire of righteous judgment. "And that is attempted murder." Braden shook his head violently, tears streaming down his face. No, I never touched you. I never hurt you. You took away my insulin." Moses said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You told the nurses I didn't need it. You changed the chart. If I had stayed in that bed one more night, I would have gone into a coma. You didn't use a gun, Braden. You used a pen, but you tried to kill me just the same." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Attempted murder. That wasn't a white-collar crime. That wasn't something you could pay a lawyer to fix. That was life in prison. Braden looked at Simone. She was still in the pew, looking at the floor, her body shaking with silent sobs. "Simone," he screamed, desperate for an ally. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them we just wanted to help him." Simone didn't look up. She didn't speak. She had severed the cord. She was adrift in her own shame. Braden looked at the investors in the front row. "Guys," he pleaded, holding his hands out. "It is a misunderstanding. The paperwork. The stress. I wasn't thinking clearly." The investors looked away. They were already texting their legal teams, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of Braden Thorne. I walked past Braden. I walked up the stairs to the altar. I stood next to the mahogany casket, the $50,000 box that Braden had bought to hide his sins. "You wanted a closed casket, Braden," I said, my voice calm and clear. "You fought me on it. You said you wanted to remember him as he was." I ran my hand along the smooth, polished wood. "But we both know the truth. You wanted it closed because you were afraid. You were afraid someone would see that the man inside wasn't Moses King. Or maybe..." Maybe you were afraid they would see that there was no man inside at all. I looked at the funeral director, Mr. Sneed, who was standing in the corner looking like he wanted to vanish into the wall. He knew he was compliant. He knew his license was gone. I turned back to Braden. Well, Braden, since you paid for the show, I think you deserve to see what you bought. I gripped the gold handle of the casket lid. Tiny came forward. He inserted the key again just for effect. Click. The sound was the final nail in the coffin of Braden's arrogance. I lifted the lid. The crowd leaned forward. Even the police officers craned their necks. The casket was filled with sandbags just as we had arranged. The gray canvas sacks lay there heavy and lifeless, but resting on the white satin pillow right where the head of the deceased should have been, there was a single piece of paper. It wasn't a death certificate. It wasn't a will. I reached in and picked it up. It was a crisp white document stamped with the official seal of the Fulton County Superior Court. I held it up high so the entire congregation could see. This is not a body, I announced. I looked at Braden. This is a warrant for your arrest, I said. I read from the paper, my voice echoing through the church. State of Georgia versus Braden Thorne. Warrant number 49,221. Charges include elder abuse, grand larceny, forgery in the first degree, and conspiracy to commit fraud. I walked down the steps of the altar holding the warrant out like a holy text. I walked straight up to Braden. He didn't run. He couldn't. His legs had finally given out and he was kneeling on the carpet looking up at me with the eyes of a child who has broken a window and knows there is no way to hide the pieces. You wanted the inheritance, Braden, I said looking down at him. You wanted everything my father had. I shoved the warrant into his chest. Well, here it is. This is your inheritance. It has your name on it. Braden clutched the paper. He looked at it, his hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. Dad, please, he whispered. Don't call me Dad, I said, cold as ice. The officers moved in. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They walked with the slow, deliberate pace of inevitable justice. One officer grabbed Braden's left arm. Another grabbed his right. They hauled him to his feet. He was dead weight. Turn around, the officer said. Braden turned. He looked at the casket one last time. He looked at the sandbags. He looked at the empty space where he had tried to bury his problems. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud in the silent church. Click, click. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard, louder than the organ, louder than the shouting. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut on the neck of a wolf. Moses rolled his wheelchair forward until he was inches from Braden's legs. He looked up at the man who had stolen his money and mocked his life. You told me I was the past, Braden Moses said softly, and you said you were the future. Moses smiled a grim, satisfied smile. Enjoy the future, son. I hear the food in prison is terrible. The officers turned Braden around and began to march him down the center aisle, the same aisle he had walked down moments ago as a grieving hero. Now he was walking it as a convict. The cameras flashed, blinding him. The reporters shouted questions. Mr. Thorne, did you kill him? Mr. Thorne, where is the money? Mr. Thorne, look this way. Braden hung his head, trying to hide his face, but there was nowhere to hide. He was exposed. He was ruined. I stood next to my father, watching him go. I put my hand on Moses' shoulder. It is done, Pop, I whispered. Moses nodded. He didn't look happy. He looked tired, but he looked clean. The stain was being washed away. Not quite, Thaddeus, he said. He pointed his cane at the pew where Simone was still sitting. We still have one more account to settle. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut is a distinct mechanical noise. It is the sound of consequences arriving with the force of a freight train. I stood on the altar of the Cathedral of Hope, standing next to my resurrected father, and I watched as that sound shattered the last remnants of Braden Thorne's life. For a moment after the metal clicked against his wrists, Braden went silent. He stood there blinking rapidly, his chest heaving, his eyes darting around the sanctuary like a trapped animal looking for a hole in the fence. The adrenaline that had fueled his frantic denial was fading, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the situation. He was in cuffs, in front of the press, in front of the investors, in front of the God he had just lied to. He looked at the police officer holding his arm. Wait, he whispered, his voice trembling. Just wait a second. I can explain. We can work this out. I have money. I have assets. The officer didn't blink. You have the right to remain silent, the officer droned, his voice flat and bored. No, Braden shouted, pulling against the restraints. I don't want to remain silent. I want to talk. "You are making a mistake. I am not the one you want. I am just the executor. I just signed the papers. I didn't plan this." He looked around the room, desperate for a lifeline. He looked at Moses sitting in the wheelchair, stern and unyielding as a mountain. He looked at me, his father-in-law, who he had tried to evict. He saw no mercy in our eyes. He saw only the reflection of his own sins. And then his eyes landed on the front pew. He saw Simone. My daughter was still sitting there, paralyzed by the shock of seeing her grandfather alive, and the horror of seeing her husband arrested. Her hands were covering her mouth, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. She looked broken. She looked terrified. But above all, she looked at Braden with a desperate longing, waiting for him to tell her it would be okay. She was waiting for the man she had sacrificed her family for to protect her. But Braden Thorne was not a protector. He was a parasite. And when a parasite is threatened, it doesn't fight. It finds a new host to blame. I saw the change happen in his face. I saw the love, if it ever existed, evaporate, instantly replaced by a vicious, calculating survival instinct. He realized he was going down for attempted murder. He realized he was looking at 20 years. And he realized that there was only one person in the room who knew as much about the scheme as he did. "It wasn't me," Braden screamed, spinning around to point a cuffed hand at Simone. The sudden movement made the officers jerk him back, but Braden kept screaming, spitting the words out with venomous force. "It was her. It was Simone. She did it. She is the one you want." The air in the cathedral seemed to drop 10 degrees. The crowd gasped. Simone lowered her hands slowly, her eyes widening in disbelief. She shook her head slightly, as if trying to clear a buzzing in her ears. "Braden, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the commotion. "Don't look at me like that, Simone," Braden yelled, his face twisting into a mask of ugly desperation. "You told me to do it. You told me the old man was a burden. You said he was senile. You said nobody would care if we moved him." "No." Simone gasped, standing up, her legs shaking. "No, Braden, that is a lie. You said we had to save him money. You said—" "She planned it," Braden shouted over her, drowning out her defense. He turned to the police officers, his eyes wide and pleading. "Listen to me. She is the lawyer. I am just a finance guy. I don't know the legal loopholes. She drew up the power of attorney. She drafted the fake will. She told me where to sign. She said her grandfather was a vegetable and it was a mercy to let him go. He was improvising now, mixing lies with half-truths, trying to weave a net that would catch her and let him slip through." "She owes money to loan sharks," Braden screamed, pointing at her again. "She has a gambling problem. She begged me to help her pay it off. I only moved the money to protect her. I was trying to be a good husband." I watched Simone. I watched the physical impact of his words hit her. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. She had betrayed her father for this man. She had betrayed the grandfather who raised her for this man. She had lied to the police. She had signed fraudulent documents. She had almost sold her soul to save him from the syndicate. She believed in him. She believed they were partners against the world, Bonnie and Clyde. And in the span of 10 seconds, he had turned her into the villain to save his own skin. "Braden, stop!" Simone wailed, a sound of pure heartbreak that echoed off the stone walls. "How can you say that? I did everything for you. I lied for you." "See," Braden shouted triumphantly, looking at the detective. "See, she admits it. She lied. She is the mastermind. I was just following orders. I was scared of her. She is unstable. Look at her." He was manic now, laughing hysterically. "She hates her father," he added, looking at me with a sneer. "She hates you, Thad. She told me you were a loser. She said she couldn't wait to kick you out of the house so we could turn it into a rental property. That was her idea. All of it." I stood on the altar, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I wanted to step down there. I wanted to silence him. But Moses reached out and touched my arm. "Let him speak, Thaddeus," my father said softly. "Let her hear him. Let her hear every word." So I stood still. I let the poison flow. Because Moses was right. Simone needed to hear this. She needed to see the monster without his mask. She needed to understand that the man she loved didn't exist. He was just a reflection of her own needs, and now that she was no longer useful, he was shattering the mirror. Simone stood alone in the pew. The people around her, the bankers and the society wives, had pulled away, leaving a circle of isolation around her. She looked at Braden, and for the first time she really saw him. She saw the sweat on his upper lip. She saw the cowardice in his eyes. She saw the small, petty man who would burn his wife to avoid a spark. "You are lying," she whispered, the realization stealing her voice. You never loved me. You only loved the money." Braden didn't even look at her. He was busy trying to cut a deal with the officer holding his elbow. "I can testify," he babbled. "I have emails. I have texts. I can give you everything if you cut me a deal. I will give you Simone King on a silver platter. Just don't put me in general population." The detective, a burly man named Miller, looked at Braden with undisguised disgust. "Mr. Thorne," Detective Miller said, his voice cutting through Braden's hysteria, "we have the bank records, we have the IP addresses, and we have the witness testimony from the nursing home director. We know exactly who did what." Detective Miller tightened his grip on Braden's arm. "And right now, the only person talking is you, and everything you say is just digging your hole deeper." Miller nodded to his partner. "Get him out of here. He is making me sick." The officers yanked Braden forward. He stumbled, his feet tangling in the carpet. "No, wait," Braden screamed as they dragged him down the aisle. "Simone, tell them. Tell them it was you. Don't let them take me. I can't go to jail. I have allergies. I need my meds." He fought them, kicking and thrashing. "Simone," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "You bitch! You set me up. This is your fault. I hate you. I have always hated you." He passed by her pew. He lunged at her, trying to bite her, trying to hurt her one last time, but the officers held him back. "I hope you rot," Braden screamed as they hauled him through the double doors. "I hope you die alone." The doors slammed shut. The silence that rushed back into the cathedral was heavy and suffocating. The echo of his hate hung in the air like smoke. Simone didn't move. She stood frozen, staring at the closed doors. Her hands were trembling violently. She looked like she had been stripped naked in front of the entire city. She slowly turned her head. She looked up at the altar. She looked at Moses sitting in his wheelchair, his medals shining, his face stern but sad. And then she looked at me. Her eyes were pleading. They were begging for me to say something, to fix it, to tell her that it was just a bad dream. She wanted the father who used to check under her bed for monsters to come down and tell her the monster was gone. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. I looked at her. I remembered the little girl with the scraped knee. I remembered the teenager studying for the SATs. I remembered the bride glowing in white standing right there where she was standing now, pledging her life to the man who had just destroyed her. But I also remembered the coffee shop. I remembered the coldness in her eyes when she told me to leave my home. I remembered her saying that $2 million was worth more than her grandfather's life. She wasn't a child anymore. She was a woman who had made a series of catastrophic choices. She had bet against her blood and she had lost. I didn't step down from the altar. I didn't open my arms. I just looked at her. My eyes were dry. The anger had burned away, leaving only a vast, empty plain of disappointment. It is a terrible thing for a father to look at his child and feel not love, not hate, but disappointment. It is a weight that sits on your soul. She took a step toward me. "Dad," she sobbed, reaching out a hand. "He lied. You know he lied. I didn't want you to die." I didn't say anything. I just shook my head slowly. It wasn't that I didn't believe her about the murder plot. I knew Braden was the architect of that, but she had been the willing passenger. She had watched him drive the car off the cliff, and she had only screamed when she hit the water. I turned away from her. I walked over to Moses's wheelchair. I put my hands on the handles. "We are done here, Pop," I said quietly. Moses nodded. He didn't look at Simone either. "Let us go home, Thaddeus," he said. I pushed the wheelchair toward the side exit, the one leading to the sacristy. We turned our backs on the congregation. We turned our backs on the cameras. And we turned our backs on Simone. "Dad," she screamed behind us, a sound of pure desolation. "Daddy, please don't leave me." I kept walking. I heard her collapse into the pew. I heard the sobbing start again, a raw animal sound of grief. I wanted to turn back. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to go pick her up, but I kept walking. She had to learn. She had to sit in the wreckage she had helped create. She had to feel the cold wind of the world without her father's coat to keep her warm, because if I saved her now, she would never learn to save herself. We passed through the door and into the quiet hallway of the church. The sound of her crying faded as the door clicked shut. I stopped pushing the chair. I leaned against the wall and put my head in my hands. "You did the right thing, son," Moses said softly, without turning around. "I know, Pop," I whispered. "But it feels like I just buried her," I said. Moses sighed. "Sometimes you have to let them break, Thaddeus. It is the only way they can be put back together right." I stood up straight. I wiped my face. "Let us go home, Pop," I said. We walked out into the sunlight, leaving the darkness of the church behind us, but a piece of my heart stayed in that front pew, broken and alone, and I knew that fixing it would be harder than building any skyscraper I had ever designed. The fluorescent lights of the Fulton County Police Precinct buzzed with a low headache-inducing hum that seemed to vibrate right through the plastic chairs in the waiting area. I sat next to my father holding a cup of lukewarm vending machine coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. Moses sat in his wheelchair, his back straight, his hands resting on the head of his silver cane. He hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. He was staring at the heavy steel door that separated the free world from the holding cells. We were not waiting for Braden. Braden Thorne was gone. Just 10 minutes ago, Detective Miller had come out wiping his hands on a sanitizer wipe as if he had touched something contagious. He told us that the judge had denied bail. Given the flight risk, the severity of the attempted murder charges, and the sheer volume of financial fraud, Braden was being held in the county jail until trial. Miller told us that when Braden heard he was going to general population, he started screaming about his allergies and demanding a private cell because he owed money to the syndicate. "Good luck with that," Miller had said with a grim smirk. "The syndicate has reach everywhere, even inside." So Braden was gone, locked away in a cage of his own making. But we were still waiting. We were waiting for the other conspirator. We were waiting for my daughter. The heavy steel door buzzed and clicked open. Simone stepped out. She looked like a stranger. The polished, high-powered lawyer in the designer dress was gone. In her place was a woman who looked like she had been shattered into 1,000 pieces and glued back together wrong. Her mascara was smeared across her cheeks in dark streaks. Her hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was matted and falling out of its bun. Her expensive dress was wrinkled and stained with sweat. She took 2 steps into the waiting room and stopped. She saw us. She saw the father she had tried to evict and the grandfather she had tried to bury. She didn't run to us. She didn't wave. She just stood there, trembling, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. Detective Miller stood behind her. "She is free to go," Mr. King Miller said, looking at Moses. "Since you declined to press charges against her for the kidnapping and the fraud, the district attorney is letting her walk with a warning. She is a lucky woman." Moses didn't look at the detective. He kept his eyes locked on Simone. "Come here, girl," Moses said. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't the booming voice of judgment he had used in the church. It was quiet. It was the voice of a grandfather calling a child in for dinner. Simone walked toward us. Her legs were shaking so bad I thought she would fall. She stopped 5 feet away. She couldn't look him in the eye. She looked at his shoes. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Closer," Moses said. She took another step. Then her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the dirty linoleum floor of the police station. She didn't try to stand up. She stayed on her knees, bowing her head until her forehead almost touched the ground. "I am sorry," she sobbed. The sound was raw and guttural. "I am so sorry. I didn't know he was going to hurt you like that. I thought we were just moving you. I thought you wouldn't mind." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Daddy, please, tell him." I was scared. Braden said they would kill him. "I did it for love, Daddy. I did it to save my husband." I looked down at my daughter. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to pull her up and hug her and tell her that everything would be okay. That is what a father does. He fixes things. But I looked at Moses. I saw the set of his jaw. I saw the pain in his eyes. And I knew that some things cannot be fixed with a hug. Some things have to be burned away. I didn't speak. I stepped back, letting Moses take the lead. This was his verdict to deliver. Moses looked down at the woman kneeling before him. He looked at the grandchild he had bounced on his knee, the girl he had taught to fish, the woman he had put through law school. "Love," Moses repeated slowly, testing the word like it was a sour grape. "You say you did it for love, Simone." "Yes," she wept, nodding frantically. "I love him, Grandpa." "And did you love me?" Moses asked. "Yes," she screamed. "Of course I love you." Moses shook his head slowly. "No, child, you didn't love me. You loved what I could give you. You loved the safety net. You loved the checks. You loved the house. But you didn't love the man." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Love is protection, Simone. Love is standing in the rain so someone else stays dry. Your father, Thaddeus. He loves me. He fought for me. He risked everything to save me. That is love." He pointed a shaking finger at her. "What you did. Putting a price tag on my life. Signing a paper to erase me so you could pay off a gambler's debt. That isn't love. That is commerce. You traded me Simone, like a used car." Simone covered her face, crying harder. "I am sorry," she wailed. "I will pay it back. I will make it right. Just please, don't send me to jail. I can't go to jail." Moses reached into the inside pocket of his military jacket. "You aren't going to jail," he said. Simone looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "You aren't?" she asked. "No," Moses said. "I told the district attorney that I would not testify against my own blood. I will not be the reason a king sits in a cell. The world is cruel enough to black folks without us locking each other up." He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a cream-colored envelope. Simone reached for it, her hand shaking. "Thank you, Grandpa," she breathed. "Thank you. I promise. I will go home tonight, and I will." "You will not go home." Moses cut her off, his voice sharp as a razor. Simone froze her hand, hovering over the envelope. What she whispered. "You will not go to the estate," Moses said. "And you will not go to the condo in Midtown." He thrust the envelope into her hand. "Open it," he commanded. Simone opened the envelope. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a letter of forgiveness. It was a legal document, an eviction notice, and a restraining order barring her from the King family estate and all subsidiary properties. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It is a notice," Moses said. "You have 24 hours to remove your personal effects from the house. After that, the locks will be changed. The security codes will be reset. And if you set foot on the property again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. But where will I go?" Simone stammered. "I sold my apartment to help Braden. The house is all I have." Moses leaned back in his wheelchair. He looked at her with a calm, devastating finality. "You have your law degree, Simone. You have your health. And you have your freedom. That is more than most people start with." He looked at me, then back at her. "Your father started with a shovel and a pair of boots. I started with a uniform and a bus ticket. We built this family from the dirt up. We sweated for it. We bled for it." He gestured to the fluorescent lights of the station. "You have never sweated a day in your life, granddaughter. You thought the world owed you a living because your last name was King. You thought the money was magic. You thought the roof over your head was a right, not a privilege." He tapped his cane on the floor. "Well, today the magic runs out." Simone looked at the paper, then at us. The reality was sinking in. She wasn't going to prison, but she was being exiled. She was being cut off from the golden umbilical cord that had fed her for 40 years. "You are kicking me out," she whispered. "You are making me homeless." "I am making you an adult," Moses said. He signaled for me to grab the handles of the wheelchair. "Thaddeus, take me to the car." I stepped forward and gripped the rubber handles. I looked down at Simone one last time. She looked like a child who had been left behind at the mall. "Dad," she said softly, "please, talk to him." I looked at her. I felt the familiar tug of parental guilt, the instinct to fix it. But then I thought about the nursing home. I thought about the fake will. I thought about how easily she had looked me in the eye at the coffee shop and told me to get out of my own home. "He is right, Simone," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, the same $20 bill I had tried to give her at the coffee shop. I dropped it on the floor next to her knee. "Take the bus," I said. I turned the wheelchair around. We walked toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open, letting in the rush of hot Atlanta air and the sound of traffic. Behind us, I heard Simone screaming, "Grandpa, Daddy, don't leave me here." We didn't stop. We didn't turn around. We walked out to the parking lot where my old sedan was waiting. I helped Moses into the passenger seat. He groaned slightly as he settled in his old war wounds, aching from the stress of the day. I folded the wheelchair and put it in the trunk. I got into the driver's seat. I looked at Moses. He was staring out the window, his eyes wet. He wasn't made of stone. Cutting off his grandchild had broken his heart, but he knew it was necessary surgery. "Are you okay, Pop?" I asked. He took a deep breath and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "She will be all right, Thaddeus," he said, his voice rough. "She is a king. She is smart. She will struggle for a while. She will cry. She will hate us." He turned to look at me. "But maybe, just maybe, when she has to pay her own light bill, when she has to work for her own bread, she will understand what we built. And maybe one day she will come back. Not as a leech, but as a woman." I started the engine. Maybe I said, I pulled out of the police station lot. I saw Simone standing on the sidewalk in the rearview mirror. She was clutching the eviction notice, looking lost in the city she thought she owned. I turned the corner, and she disappeared from view. We drove in silence for a long time. The city lights flickered past us. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it was clean. The lies were gone. The parasites were gone. We were lighter now. We had lost a daughter, but we had saved the family. And sometimes in this life, that is the only victory you get. The sound of a paper shredder is usually an annoying mechanical whine, but tonight, in the quiet of my father's study, it sounded like a choir of angels. I stood by the heavy oak door holding a tray with 2 cups of chamomile tea and watched as Moses King fed a stack of documents into the machine. One by one, the pages disappeared. The last will and testament from 2010. The codicil from 2015. The draft of the trust fund that Braden had tried to manipulate. The shredder chewed them up and spit them out as confetti. 50 years of estate planning, 50 years of deciding who gets the silver and who gets the land. It was all gone in less than 5 minutes. Moses sat back in his leather chair. He looked tired. The adrenaline of the church confrontation and the police station had faded, leaving behind the frailty of a 94-year-old man. But his eyes were still bright. They burned with the clarity of a man who had finally cleaned his house. "That is it," Moses said, dusting his hands off. "It is all gone, Thaddeus. The old plan is dead." I walked over and set the tea down on the desk. I sat in the chair opposite him. "So what now, Pop?" I asked. "We can't leave the estate in limbo. If something happens to you—" "Nothing is going to happen to me," Moses snapped, taking a sip of tea. "I am going to live to be 105 just to spite Braden." He smiled a small, weary smile. "But you are right, son. We need a new plan. And this time we are going to write it in stone, not in sand." He opened the top drawer of his desk. He pulled out a thick leather binder. It wasn't dusty. It looked new. "I had Elijah draft this up last night," Moses said. "While you were at the funeral home dealing with the casket, Elijah and I were building the future." He slid the binder across the desk to me. "Open it," he said. I opened the heavy cover. The first page was stamped with the seal of the Vance law firm, the Moses King Community Trust. I looked up at him confused. "Community Trust?" I asked. "Not the King Family Trust." Moses shook his head slowly. "No, Thaddeus. Not the family. The family has had enough." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I looked at Braden today," Moses said. "I looked at his greed. I looked at how he viewed my money not as a tool, but as a toy. And then I looked at Simone. I looked at how she expected the inheritance to solve her problems." He paused, his voice dropping low. "And I realized something, Thaddeus. I realized that wealth without work is a poison. It rots the soul. We thought we were blessing them by giving them a cushion, but we were actually crippling them. We took away their hunger. We took away their need to fight." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in my chest. I had seen it in Simone. She had lost her drive because she always knew there was a safety net. "So where does the money go?" I asked, looking at the document. Moses pointed to the second page. "Read it," he said. I scanned the legal text. Article 1. The entirety of the King estate, including all liquid assets, stock portfolios, and future dividends, shall be liquidated and placed into a perpetual blind trust. Article 2. The sole purpose of the trust is to provide interest-free small business loans to minority entrepreneurs in the city of Atlanta and to provide full tuition scholarships for students from the South Side attending historically black colleges and universities. I stopped reading. I looked at my father. "Pop," I whispered. This is everything. Millions of dollars. "It belongs to them," Moses said simply. "It belongs to the people who helped me build it. It belongs to the community that shopped in my stores and rented my apartments. It belongs to the future Thaddeus, not to a couple of spoiled heirs who want to buy sports cars." I felt a lump form in my throat. This was the Moses King I knew. This was the man who had marched in the 60s. This was the man who had secretly paid for the funerals of half the neighborhood. "And what about the house?" I asked. "This house. The house stays," Moses said. "It will be the headquarters of the trust. And it will be your home, Thaddeus, for as long as you live. You are the executor. You are the guardian of the trust. I am paying you a salary, a fair salary, enough to live comfortably, enough to buy your books and your records, but not enough to make you lazy." I laughed. I am 72, Pop. I think I am past the age of being lazy. Moses didn't laugh. He looked at me with a serious expression. And then there is Simone, he said. The room went quiet. The name hung in the air like smoke. I turned the page. Article 3. Beneficiary Simone King. I read the clause. It was detailed, it was specific, and it was brutal. Simone King shall receive a monthly stipend equivalent to the current federal minimum wage for a 40-hour work week. I looked up. Minimum wage. That was barely enough to pay rent on a studio apartment. Keep reading. Moses commanded. This stipend is conditional. To receive the funds, the beneficiary must provide proof of 40 hours of volunteer service per week at a registered nonprofit organization designated by the trust executor. These organizations shall include but are not limited to soup kitchens, homeless shelters, and elderly care facilities. If the beneficiary misses a single hour of service, the stipend for that month is forfeited. I closed the binder. I sat back in my chair, stunned. You are making her work for minimum wage, I said, and you are making her do it in a soup kitchen. Moses nodded, his face impassive. She needs to learn Thaddeus. She needs to learn what it feels like to stand on your feet for 8 hours serving people who have nothing. She needs to smell the poverty she tried to ignore. She needs to look into the eyes of people who are actually struggling, not people who are struggling to pay off a bookie. But Pop, I said, playing devil's advocate, she is a lawyer. She made 6 figures. This is humiliation. It is rehabilitation. Moses corrected me. He reached out and tapped the binder. Humiliation is what happened to her in that church today. That was the result of her vanity. This is the cure. He looked me in the eye. If she does this, Thaddeus, if she sticks with it for a year, maybe 2, she will change. She will stop seeing herself as a victim. She will start seeing herself as a servant. And that is when she will become a king again. He took a sip of his tea. And if she refuses, I asked. If she says it is beneath her, then she starves, Moses said simply. He didn't say it with malice. He said it with the cold, hard logic of a man who knew that hunger is the best teacher. If she is too proud to serve soup, then she can figure out another way to eat. She has a degree, she can get a job, she can work as a public defender, she can work at a coffee shop. I don't care. But she will never see another dime of free money from this family. The tap is turned off, Thaddeus. Permanently. I looked at the binder. The Moses King Community Trust. It was a beautiful thing. It was a legacy that would outlast all of us. I picked up my pen. I signed the witness line at the bottom of the page. It is done, I said, closing the book. Moses let out a long sigh. He slumped slightly in his chair as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. We messed up, Thaddeus, he said softly, looking at his hands. What do you mean, Pop? With her, Moses said. With Simone. He looked at a framed photo on his desk. It was a picture of Simone when she was 5 years old, sitting on a pony at the petting zoo. She was laughing. I was holding the reins and Moses was standing next to us, beaming with pride. We loved her too much, Moses whispered. Or maybe we loved her the wrong way. I wanted her to have everything I didn't have. Moses continued, his voice trembling slightly. I grew up sleeping on a dirt floor, Thaddeus. I grew up hungry. When I made my money, I promised myself that no child of mine would ever know that feeling. He looked at me. So I gave you everything, and you turned out okay. You had my grit. Maybe because you saw me working. You saw the sweat. I nodded. I remembered him coming home covered in drywall dust, too tired to eat. But Simone? Moses said, shaking his head. She only saw the finished product. She saw the big house. She saw the cars. She never saw the struggle. We hid the struggle from her, Thaddeus. We thought we were protecting her. He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. We wrapped her in cotton wool. We told her she was special just because she was born, and we created a monster who thought she was entitled to eat the fruit without watering the tree. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. He was right. I had done it too. When she crashed her first car, I bought her a new one. When she failed a class, I hired a tutor to fix it. I had paved the road for her so smooth that she never learned how to walk on rocks. It is my fault too, Pop, I said. I let Braden in. I saw the red flags. I saw he was flashy. I saw he was shallow. But I didn't want to hurt her feelings. I wanted her to have the fairy tale wedding. I paid for the poison that killed this family. Moses reached across the desk and took my hand. His grip was warm and rough. "We can't change the past, son," he said. "We can't unspoil the child." He squeezed my hand. "But we can fix the future. It is late in the day, Thaddeus. The sun is setting, but it is not dark yet." He pointed to the binder. "This is the fix. We are taking away the crutch. We are forcing her to walk. It is going to hurt her. She is going to hate us. She is going to curse our names while she is scrubbing pots in a shelter." He smiled a sad, hopeful smile. "But one day, maybe 10 years from now, she will understand. She will realize that this was the only inheritance that mattered. The inheritance of character." I squeezed his hand back. "You are a wise man, Moses King," I said. "I am just an old man who doesn't want to die leaving a mess behind," Moses said. He stood up. He picked up his cane. "Come on, son," he said. "Put that binder in the safe. The real safe. The one in the floor." I stood up and took the binder. I walked to the corner of the room, pulled back the rug, and opened the floor safe. I placed the future of the King family inside and spun the dial. I stood up and looked at my father. He was standing by the window looking out at the night. The flashing lights of the police cars were long gone. The driveway was empty. The house was quiet. "Let us get some sleep, Pop," I said. "We have a lot of work to do tomorrow." Moses turned and looked at me. "Yes, we do," he said. "Tomorrow we start giving it all away." He walked past me toward the door. He stopped and looked back. "And, Thaddeus." "Yes, Pop." "Make sure you cancel that order for the Porsche 911, he said with a wink. I laughed. "I already did, Pop. I told the dealership the buyer had a change of address." "Oh, really? Where to?" "State Penitentiary," I said. Moses chuckled. "Good. That is good." He walked out into the hallway, his cane tapping a rhythm on the floor. I turned off the lamp in the study. I stood in the darkness for a moment, breathing in the smell of old paper and new beginnings. We had lost a fortune in the eyes of the world, but in that room, in that safe, we had saved something far more valuable. We had saved our souls. And for the first time in a long time, I slept without worrying about the roof falling in. The foundation was fixed, and it was solid as a rock. The oak trees in the front yard of the King estate are shedding their leaves again. It is a slow, golden rain that covers the driveway in a blanket of color. A year ago, I would have looked at those leaves and worried about the cost of the landscaping crew. I would have worried about the maintenance. I would have worried about the property value, but today I just watch them fall. I watch the way the setting sun catches them, making them look like falling coins. I am sitting on the porch in my favorite rocking chair. The wood creaks with a familiar rhythm. Back and forth, back and forth. Next to me, sitting in a chair that is slightly larger and slightly older, is my father, Moses King. He is 95 years old now. The doctors said he wouldn't make it past Christmas. They said the stress of the trial, the scandal, and the media circus would be too much for his heart. But they forgot who they were dealing with. Moses King doesn't die when people tell him to. He lives out of spite. He lives because he has work to do. He is holding a cup of coffee, black, no sugar. His hand shakes a little more than it used to, but he holds the cup with a grip of iron. He is looking out at the garden, his eyes scanning the horizon with the same intensity he used when he was scanning for enemy tanks in Europe. It is quiet here. The news vans are gone. The reporters have moved on to the next scandal. The phone doesn't ring with threats from loan sharks anymore. The silence is beautiful. I took a sip of my own coffee. It was good coffee, not the expensive stuff Braden used to buy to impress his friends, just honest coffee brewed in a pot that we have had for 20 years. Speaking of Braden, I thought about where he was right now. It was 6:00 in the evening. In the Fulton County Penitentiary, that means it is head count time. Braden Thorne is currently standing in a 6-by-8-foot cell wearing a jumpsuit that doesn't fit him. He is serving year 1 of a 15-year sentence. The jury didn't buy his story. They didn't buy the tears. They didn't buy the attempt to blame his wife. The evidence was too overwhelming. The forged signature, the wire transfers, the testimony of the nursing home director who turned state's witness to save his own skin. Braden wanted a gated community. He wanted a life where he didn't have to work. Well, he got it. He has a gate. He has guards. And he doesn't have to lift a finger except to scrub his own toilet. I don't feel hate for him anymore. Hate takes energy. And I am too old to waste energy on a man who is already buried in concrete. I just feel a distant pity. He had the keys to the kingdom, and he threw them away because he wanted to pick the lock instead. And then there is Simone. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out an envelope. It had arrived yesterday. There was no return address, just a postmark from East Atlanta. I opened it for the 10th time. Inside there was a check, a cashier's check for $75, and a note, written on yellow legal pad paper. Dad, this is for the electric bill from that month I stayed with you in 2019. I know it isn't much, but I am picking up extra shifts at the diner on weekends. I will send more next month. I hope Grandpa is eating well. Tell him I fixed the leak in my own sink yesterday. I didn't call a plumber. I used a wrench. I think he would have been proud. I rubbed my thumb over the handwriting. It wasn't the looped fancy script of the lawyer she used to be. It was hurried. It was the handwriting of a woman who works 50 hours a week. Simone didn't go to jail, but she went to a prison of her own making, and then she broke out of it. Moses had stuck to his guns. He cut her off, completely. She had to sell her designer clothes. She had to sell her jewelry. She moved into a small walk-up apartment in a neighborhood that Braden would have been afraid to drive through. She got a job as a social worker, a real job. She spends her days helping families who are about to lose their children, helping people who are addicted, helping people who have nothing. She sees the reality of the world now, and she works. She works hard. She hasn't come back to the house yet. She says she isn't ready. She says she hasn't earned it yet. But this check, this $75, it is worth more to me than the millions Braden tried to steal, because this money is real. It is clean. It represents sweat. It represents dignity. I looked over at Moses. He noticed the paper in my hand. Is that the check? He asked, his voice raspy but strong. Yes, Pop, I said. He nodded slowly, taking a sip of his coffee. $75, he mused. That is a lot of money for a waitress and a social worker. She fixed her own sink, Pop, I said. She used a wrench. Moses smiled. It was a genuine smile, a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Good, he whispered. Good. The girl is learning. He put his cup down on the small table between us. You know Thaddeus? He said, looking at the setting sun. I used to worry about this house. I used to worry about who would cut the grass when I was gone. I used to worry about the bricks crumbling. He gestured to the massive lawn. But I realized something sitting here this past year. The house doesn't matter. If it burns down tomorrow, it is just wood and ash. He looked at me. The legacy isn't the roof, Thaddeus. It is the spine. I nodded, understanding him perfectly. We almost lost her, Pop, I said. We almost lost Simone to the rot. But we cut it out, Moses said. It was painful. God knows it was painful. But the tree is healing. She is growing new branches, stronger branches. He pointed a finger at me. And the trust. How is the trust doing? I smiled. It is doing great, Pop. We gave out 10 scholarships last week. 10 kids from the South Side are going to college in the fall, full ride. And we approved the loan for that young woman who wants to open a bakery on 4th Street. Moses nodded, satisfied. That is good, he said. That is the money working. That is the money sweating. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the evening breeze cool his face. I am tired, Thaddeus, he said softly. I know, Pop, but it is a good tired, he said. It is the kind of tired you feel after you build a wall that you know will stand for 100 years. He opened his eyes and looked at me. We won, son. We didn't win a lawsuit. We didn't win a lottery. We won our family back. We won our dignity back. And Braden? Well, he won a masterclass in why you never underestimate the men who built the road you are walking on. I looked at the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. It was the end of the day, but it felt like the beginning of something else. I am going to frame this check, I said, holding up Simone's payment. You do that, Moses said. Put it right next to my medals. It belongs there. We sat there in silence as the crickets started to chirp. 2 old men on a porch in Georgia. We weren't rich in the way Braden wanted to be rich. We didn't have yachts. We didn't have private jets. But we had peace. We had honor. And we had a daughter who was finally learning how to stand on her own 2 feet. And that, I realized, was the greatest fortune of all. I took one last sip of my coffee. You want a refill? Pop, I asked. Moses shook his head. No, son. I am good. I have everything I need right here. He closed his eyes again, a small smile playing on his lips. The wolf came to the door. Thaddeus. He huffed and he puffed. But he couldn't blow the house down. I finished for him. Moses laughed a soft, wheezing chuckle. Damn right he couldn't. Because this house wasn't built with straw. It was built with blood. We sat there as the stars came out one by one, watching over us like the spirits of our ancestors. The nightmare was over. The morning had come, and the kings were still standing. We often treat the elderly as fading shadows easy to ignore or exploit, forgetting that they are the architects who built the ground we stand on. Greed can make us view family not as loved ones but as obstacles to an inheritance. But true legacy isn't written in a will, it is written in character. When you try to bury the truth, make sure it is actually dead. Because the wisdom of the past has a way of coming back to haunt the arrogance of the present. Respect your elders not just for who they were, but for who they still are. The roots of a tree are always stronger than the branches that try to break them. Wealth is not what you leave in a bank account. It is the lessons you leave in the hearts of your children. It is the ability to walk with your head high knowing you earned every step. Thank you for listening to my story. It was a long journey from that nursing home to this porch, but every mile was worth it. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that family and honor are worth fighting for, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And I want to ask you a question. If you were in Moses' shoes, would you have forgiven Simone sooner, or do you think the tough love was necessary to save her? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never forget to call your parents. This is Thaddeus King signing off.